The late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, its golden rays glinting off the granite countertops. I stood at the head of the table, arranging DNA collection kits with the precision of someone who had spent decades in pharmaceutical research. I cleared my throat and called out, "Everyone, please sit down. This won't take long." Marco, my 10-year-old son, bounded into the kitchen with his Nintendo Switch in hand. "Is this for the study you mentioned, Dad?" "That's right, buddy," I said, ruffling his straight brown hair. It was so different from my own sandy blonde waves. I glanced toward the hallway. "Where's your sister?" "Right here, Dad," Isabella said as she walked into the room. At 12, her dark curls bounced as she moved, and her features already hinted at the beauty she'd inherit from her mother. I had always found it curious how little she resembled me. Finally, Mira entered, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Even after a long day at the law firm, she was immaculate, her tailored charcoal suit perfectly pressed. She perched at the edge of the table, her movements poised. "I still don't see why we need to participate in this study, Renee. We're all healthy." I uncapped the first swab kit, my movements deliberate. "The compensation package includes lifetime health monitoring for the entire family," I replied smoothly. I didn't add that my research director wanted my family's participation to encourage others at the company to join the study. "And who knows? We might discover something interesting about our ancestry." Mira hesitated, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming once on the table before she picked up her phone. It was a micro-expression, fleeting but not lost on me. After 15 years of marriage, I'd grown adept at reading her face. "Fine," she said with a sigh. "But I have a client meeting in an hour." "It's just a cheek swab," I assured her, though her resistance tugged at the edges of my thoughts. "Marco, you're up first," I said. He opened his mouth obediently, and I swabbed the inside of his cheek. His olive complexion seemed to darken in the fading sunlight. Mira had always attributed that to her Mexican heritage. "Does it hurt?" Isabella asked, her eyes wide as she watched her brother. "Nah, just tickles," Marco said, already engrossed in his game again. I labeled Marco's sample with practiced efficiency. "Your turn, Isabella." As I swabbed her cheek, I studied her features. Her nose was becoming more prominent, her jaw more defined, traits that didn't align with either my Scottish-German background or Mira's supposed Mexican-American ancestry. "Mom's turn," Isabella said brightly, eager to watch her mother's turn. Mira's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it quickly and turned it face down before opening her mouth for the swab. "Can we hurry this along?" she asked. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. I swabbed her cheek and noted how her hand twitched toward her phone, though she resisted checking it. Something about her agitation stirred unease in me. "All done," I announced, labeling her sample. Finally, I took my own swab, sealed all 4 kits into the pre-addressed envelope, and placed them in my briefcase. "I'll drop these at the lab tomorrow morning." "Great," Mira said, standing abruptly. "I need to get ready for my meeting with Vince." She was referring to her boss, Vincent Romano, the managing partner of her firm. "Late meeting with Vince, huh?" I asked casually. "Yes, he's bringing in a new client." She kissed the children on their foreheads and grabbed her coat. "Don't wait up. It might run late." After she left, Isabella helped me clean up the testing supplies. "Dad, will this tell us if we're part Scottish like you?" she asked, her eyes curious. "Yes," I said with a smile. "It'll show us all our ancestral backgrounds." I tried to push aside the doubt that flickered in the back of my mind about Isabella's distinctly Mediterranean features. Later that evening, as I sat in my office reviewing research proposals, I heard Mira return home. The faint scent of expensive cologne wafted under my door, not the kind I wore. 3 weeks passed in the routine rhythm of work, school runs, and evening family time. My research team processed hundreds of genetic samples, including my family's, to build a revolutionary database for personalized medicine. By Friday evening, I was alone in my office, scanning the latest batch of results. My eyes skimmed over the familiar markers until I reached my family's samples. I frowned. Running the analysis again, I sat back in my chair as the truth sank in. Marco and Isabella's genetic markers showed strong Italian heritage, not a trace of my Scottish-German ancestry. Blood pounded in my ears as memories replayed in my mind. I reconstructed years of moments through this new lens. Vince Romano's special attention to Mira's career, his mentoring her from paralegal to junior partner, the late-night strategy sessions, the firm's family picnics where Romano played with Isabella and Marco, teaching them tennis, lavishing them with attention. I pulled up the firm's website, staring at Romano's photograph. The prominent nose Isabella was developing, Marco's olive skin tone, the dark curls they both shared. My computer pinged, alerting me to an incoming email from my mother. She'd sent photos from last Christmas. One showed our family around the tree. Her comment read, "The kids look more like their mother's side every year, don't they?" I stared at the photo. My mother's knowing smile seemed to challenge me. Had she suspected? Had everyone suspected but me? My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Working late tonight. Big case with Vince. Don't wait up." I placed the phone down carefully. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. Opening my desk drawer, I removed a small voice recorder. I spoke into it, my tone cold and clinical. Initial findings suggest significant genetic anomalies requiring further investigation. Subject exhibits long-term patterns of deception involving multiple parties, beginning comprehensive documentation of all variables. I turned off the recorder and opened a new spreadsheet. If there was one thing my years in research had taught me, it was this: thorough documentation is key before acting on a discovery. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as I continued logging dates, events, and observations. Each entry painted a clearer picture of betrayal. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but my resolve was sharp. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. The deception was crystal clear, but revenge would require precision. The weekend passed in a haze of normalcy. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but beneath the routine family activities, I watched Mira with a heightened sense of scrutiny. Over breakfast, she glanced at her phone frequently, angling it away when messages came in. Isabella practiced her tennis serves in the backyard, wielding the expensive racket that had been a birthday gift from Uncle Vince. Marco tackled his homework with surprising confidence, his methods eerily reminiscent of Romano's teaching style rather than Mira's supposed tutoring. Monday morning, I stood in my private lab staring at the genetic results on my screen again. The confirmation was unrelenting. There was no trace of my DNA in the children I had raised. The scientist in me demanded I rerun the analysis, but I knew the results wouldn't change. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the youngest researchers on my team. "Dr. Gordon, do you have a moment?" she asked, clutching her tablet nervously. "Come in, Sarah," I said, minimizing the screen with practiced ease. "How's the control group analysis coming along?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," she said, hesitating. "I found some unusual patterns in Family Group 7's results. The parental markers don't align—" "Delete them," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm but firm. Her brow furrowed. "Sir, the quality controls all passed. These results—" "Sarah," I said, standing to my full height. My 6'2" frame towered over her, and I fixed her with a steely gaze. "Those results are contaminated. Document them as sample degradation and remove them from the database. That's an order." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir. Will you want to recollect the samples?" "No," I said, offering a tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. That won't be necessary. The family will be withdrawn from the study. When she left, I sat back down and pulled up my calendar. Mira had marked Friday as another late night at the firm. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I began researching private investigators. I needed someone with experience in corporate surveillance, someone who could untangle the web of lies surrounding my wife and Romano. The following evening, Mira breezed into the kitchen after work, her suit still immaculate. "Long day?" she said, setting her briefcase on the counter. "Vince is really pushing hard to land this new client." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "It's good that he values your input so much." She smiled, the picture of a loving wife. "He does. I'm lucky to have such a great mentor." As she spoke, Marco bounded into the room. "Mom, don't forget. Uncle Vince is taking me to the soccer game on Saturday." "Of course, honey," Mira said, ruffling his hair. Then, turning to me, she added, "You have to work this weekend anyway, right?" "Right," I said, masking the seething anger that boiled just below the surface. "You three have fun." The moment she turned away, I cataloged the exchange in my mind. Romano wasn't just a mentor or a friend. He was embedding himself into every facet of my family's life. His arrogance was staggering, but I would use it to my advantage. 2 days later, I met Thelma Sullivan, a seasoned private investigator, in a quiet cafe 3 towns over. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the initial notes I'd prepared. "Genetic testing," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "That's a new one." "I need everything," I told her, my voice steady and controlled. "Bank records, phone logs, email trails. 15 years of lies don't stay hidden without help." She nodded, jotting down notes. "You'd be surprised how sloppy people get when they think they're untouchable, especially lawyers." "My wife isn't sloppy," I said, "but I suspect she has plenty of accomplices." "Then let's start unraveling the threads," Thelma said, her tone professional. "Your retainer cleared. I'll begin today." Over the next week, Thelma's investigation began to peel back the layers of Mira's deception. She was meticulous, meeting me in different locations to deliver updates. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. "Your wife has been busy," Thelma said during our second meeting, sliding a stack of credit card statements across the table. "Shell company called Mr. Consulting pays for a separate phone she keeps in her office desk. The initials aren't exactly subtle. The statements showed monthly payments going back 13 years. And this," Thelma continued, producing hotel receipts. "The Waldorf, the Peninsula, the Four Seasons, always booked through the firm's corporate account as client meetings or depositions. Your friend Philippe signed off on most of them. Philippe, my best friend since college. The man who had been my best man at our wedding." "Let me see those receipts," I said, my voice deadly calm. Each line item told a damning story. Philippe had consistently reserved conference rooms that were never used, creating alibis for Mira and Romano's working dinners. "Your friend knew exactly what he was covering up," Thelma said. My jaw tightened. "What else?" She pulled out another stack of documents. "Your couple's therapist, Dr. Andrea Birch, she's been counseling your wife and Romano separately for years." "What?" I stared at her, stunned. Thelma nodded grimly. "I found emails between your wife and Dr. Birch. She wasn't helping your marriage. She was coaching them on how to maintain their affair without getting caught. The betrayal stung like a fresh wound. Even the therapist I had trusted to save our marriage had been working against me." As the weeks went on, Thelma's findings painted a horrifying picture. Romano had been systematically inserting himself into my family's life for over a decade, grooming my children to see him as a father figure while ensuring I remained in the dark. Mira's lies extended beyond the affair. She had built an entire world where I was the outsider and Romano was the center. One discovery stood out. Thelma had uncovered burial plot purchases at Holy Cross Cemetery, adjacent plots for Mira and Romano, purchased 3 years ago, Even in death, they planned to be together. By the time Thelma handed me the final pieces of evidence, I was ready. Every hotel receipt, every email thread, every financial record had been cataloged and cross-referenced. The betrayal was thorough, but so was my documentation. "What now?" Thelma asked during our final meeting. I looked her in the eye, my voice cold with purpose. "Now I dismantle everything they've built, professionally, financially, socially." She nodded, packing up her notes. "Word of advice? Men like Romano, they don't go down without a fight. Watch your back." "I'm counting on it," I said, a grim smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. That evening, I sat in my home office, reviewing the evidence one last time. Mira and Romano's carefully constructed world was about to collapse under the weight of their lies. They had no idea what was coming, and by the time they did, it would be far too late. I had always been a man of precision, and I approached my plan for revenge the same way I approached my research, methodically, with no room for error. By the time I'd compiled all the evidence, I knew exactly how I was going to destroy Mira and Romano's carefully crafted world. But the first step required patience. I needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The following days passed in a blur of routine. At home, I maintained the facade of the devoted husband, the doting father. Mira continued her usual pattern of late nights and secret texts, blissfully unaware that her double life was unraveling behind the scenes. Each time she glanced at her phone with that subtle, practiced movement, my resolve hardened. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Marco announced, "Uncle Vince says I might get to meet the players after the soccer game on Saturday." "That's exciting," Mira said, her tone warm. "He has so many connections." I set my fork down carefully. "Vince is very involved in their lives," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's almost like he's family." Mira froze for a fraction of a second before recovering. "He's just been a great mentor for the kids," she said smoothly. "We're lucky to have him." I nodded, filing away the moment for later. Yes, very lucky. Friday morning arrived, and with it, the first step in my plan. I'd arranged for a meeting with my company's legal department, ostensibly to discuss potential ethical violations at Romano's firm. What I presented was far more explosive. The firm's managing partners sat across from me, their faces shifting from curiosity to shock as I laid out the evidence. Fraudulent billing practices, misuse of corporate funds, and conflicts of interest were just the beginning. By the time I finished, they were visibly unsettled. "We'll need to verify all of this," one of the partners said. "Of course," I replied. "Take all the time you need, but you'll find the evidence is airtight." Their discomfort pleased me. Romano had been reckless, using firm resources to support his affair with Mira. It would take very little effort for his colleagues to connect the dots. Once they did, his position at the firm would be untenable. That evening, I returned home to find Mira in the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. She smiled as I walked in, the picture of a devoted wife. "You're home early," she said. "How was work?" "Productive," I said, pouring myself a drink. "I finalized some important details today." "Good," she said, leaning against the counter. "You've been so busy lately. Maybe we should plan a family trip soon, just the four of us." Her audacity was almost laughable. "That sounds nice," I said, matching her tone. "Let's talk about it next week." I kissed her on the cheek, ignoring the faint trace of cologne that didn't belong to me, and retreated to my office. There was still work to be done. The following Monday, I received an update from Thelma. "Your wife's been busy," she said, her voice tinged with dry amusement. "I found a pattern in her movements. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, she regularly visits a private apartment leased under a shell company. Romano's name is all over the paperwork." I clenched the phone tightly. "How long?" "About 12 years," she said. He's had that place since the affair started. They've been careful, but not careful enough. The apartment became the centerpiece of my growing case against Romano. It wasn't just a symbol of their betrayal, it was proof of his ethical violations. I passed the information along to the firm's legal department, ensuring they would see the connection between his personal and professional misconduct. Thelma also uncovered another damning piece of evidence: burial plots. Mira and Romano had purchased adjacent plots at Holy Cross Cemetery, their names etched into the records as though they were a legitimate couple. The sheer arrogance of it made my blood boil. Even in death, they plan to be together, I muttered. Not if you have anything to say about it, Thelma replied. How's the corporate angle shaping up? Nicely, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. Romano's colleagues are starting to take notice. It's only a matter of time. A week later, I sat in on the firm's board meeting under the guise of presenting healthcare innovations. Romano was at the head of the table, his confidence unshaken. Mira wasn't present. She was conveniently tied up with depositions, but that suited me just fine. As I began my presentation, I clicked to the first slide. Before we discuss healthcare plans, I said, I'd like to share some fascinating genetic data we've uncovered during a recent study. The board members leaned in, curious. Romano, however, stiffened slightly. I continued, my tone measured. This data reveals hereditary traits unique to Italian bloodlines. Combined with other ethnic markers, the patterns are unmistakable. Another click. Of course, these markers are most notable when there's no other significant ancestry involved. Romano's face paled as I advanced to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of genetic profiles. His features were unmistakable in the data, as were the links to my so-called children. This raises some ethical questions, I said, shifting gears, particularly when such data intersects with misuse of company resources. I clicked again, displaying hotel receipts, financial records, and incriminating emails. The room fell silent as I laid out the case against Romano, piece by damning piece. These violations aren't just personal, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. They're professional, and they reflect poorly on everyone associated with this firm. Romano stood abruptly. This is a smear campaign, he said, his voice shaking. None of this can be proven. I smiled coldly. Sit down, Vince. I'm not finished. The door opened, and Mira walked in, her confident stride faltering as she saw the presentation on the screen. She looked from me to Romano, her face a mask of disbelief. Perfect timing, I said. We were just discussing your stellar performance as a wife. The room erupted into chaos. Romano's colleagues, who had once defended him, now turned on him with ruthless efficiency. By the end of the meeting, he was forced to resign, his reputation in tatters. Mira, meanwhile, could only watch as her carefully constructed world crumbled. That evening, I met with Nell Stewart, the attorney I'd hired to handle my divorce. The evidence is solid, she said, flipping through the files. Romano's professional misconduct alone is enough to bury him. Combine that with the paternity fraud and you have an ironclad case. Good, I said. Make sure everything is airtight. I want them to feel every consequence. Nell's smile was sharp. Trust me, Mr. Gordon, by the time I'm finished, they'll wish they'd never crossed you. As I left her office, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The first phase of my plan was complete. Mira and Romano's careers were in ruins, their reputations beyond repair. But this was only the beginning. I still had more destruction to deliver. The fallout from the board meeting spread quickly. Within days, Romano was forced into an early retirement, a sanitized term for being unceremoniously removed. His colleagues, once his staunch allies, distanced themselves as the evidence mounted. The misuse of firm resources was undeniable, and the ethical violations were damning. Romano's carefully constructed professional empire crumbled, and I hadn't even released the most incriminating information yet. Mira, for her part, tried to maintain an air of calm at home. She didn't bring up the board meeting, but I could see the cracks forming. Her phone calls grew more frequent, her texts more frantic. When I intercepted one of her messages to Romano, it was clear they were strategizing damage control. "We need to talk. Call me when it's safe." Safe? The word lingered in my mind like a bad taste. They were starting to feel the pressure, and I relished it. The next step in my plan required careful timing. While Romano dealt with the collapse of his career, I turned my attention to the personal web they'd spun around me. The lies extended far beyond Mira and Romano. It was the circle of friends, family, and professionals who had knowingly facilitated their betrayal. The first target was Philippe. He had been my best friend since college, my confidant, and the man I had trusted most outside of my marriage. Discovering his role in covering for Mira and Romano's affair cut deeper than I cared to admit, but there was no room for sentimentality. I scheduled a meeting with Philippe under the guise of catching up. We met at a local cafe, the kind of place we used to frequent back in our younger days. He arrived on time, flashing his usual warm smile, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Renee," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's been too long." "It has," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "I thought it was time we talked." Philippe's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I placed a stack of receipts and emails on the table between us. His eyes widened as he recognized them. "These are your signatures," I said, my tone steady. "You reserved the rooms, signed off on the expenses, and provided alibis? You knew," Felipe stammered. "Renee, it's not what you think. I was trying to help. Mira said she needed someone to cover for her, and You betrayed me," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You didn't just cover for her. You helped them manipulate me. You sat at my table, drank my wine, and pretended to be my friend while helping them destroy my family." Felipe's face paled. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. You thought you could play both sides and come out clean," I said, cutting him off. "But now you'll face the consequences." He opened his mouth to respond, but I stood and left without another word. Philippe had already been implicated in the firm's investigation, and I knew his professional reputation would suffer. It was only a matter of time before his wife learned the full extent of his involvement. I didn't need to do anything more. His life was already unraveling. The next confrontation was more personal. I waited for a quiet evening at home, the kids upstairs, Mira in the kitchen. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping a glass of wine. I approached her, holding a small stack of papers. "Do you recognize these?" I asked, placing the burial plot documents on the counter. Her eyes widened as she scanned the records. "Renee, I can explain." "Don't bother," I said, my voice sharp. "You and Romano planned every detail, even your graves. How long have you been building this secret life?" She set the papers down, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been living a double life for 13 years, I said. "It looks like you've been lying to me, to the kids, to everyone. And it stops now." Tears welled in her eyes. "Renee, I made a mistake. I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You broke our family. You betrayed our children. Do you even realize what you've done?" Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," I continued. "The divorce papers will be served tomorrow, and don't bother trying to fight for custody. The evidence speaks for itself." Mira's expression shifted from despair to desperation. "Please, Renee, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll end things with Vince. I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late for that," I said, turning away. "You made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences." The final phase of my plan involved the children. Isabella and Marco deserved to know the truth, but I had to be careful. They were young, and I didn't want to burden them with more than they could handle. I started with Isabella. One evening, as we worked on her science project together, I brought up the topic gently. "Isabella, have you ever noticed how involved Uncle Vince is in your life?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah, he's great. He helps with my tennis, and he's always giving advice about school." "Do you ever wonder why he's so interested?" I pressed. She frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "There are things about your mother and Uncle Vince that you need to know. It's going to be hard to hear, but you deserve the truth." Over the next hour, I explained the situation as delicately as I could, showing her only enough evidence to support my words. Her reaction was a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Everything you're saying?" "I wouldn't tell you this if it weren't true," I said gently. "I'm so sorry, Isabella." Tears streamed down her face, but there was also a flicker of resolve. "I don't want to see him again," she said firmly. "And I don't want to talk to Mom right now." "I understand," I said, pulling her into a hug. "We'll get through this together." Marco's conversation was simpler. At 10, he didn't fully grasp the weight of the situation, but he understood enough to be angry. "Why would Uncle Vince do that?" he asked, his small fists clenched. "Because some people make selfish choices," I said. "But you and Isabella have me, and I'll always protect you." Marco nodded, his eyes fierce. "I don't want to see him either." By the time the divorce papers were served, Mira and Romano's world had collapsed. Their reputations were ruined, their friends had turned on them, and even their children wanted nothing to do with them. I had dismantled everything they'd built, piece by piece, and there was no turning back. As I watched Mira pack her bags and leave the house for the last time, I felt no remorse. She and Romano had spent 13 years building their lies. It had taken me only weeks to destroy them, and I wasn't done yet. The day Mira left was surprisingly quiet. She packed her things in silence, her face drawn and pale. She avoided looking at me or the children, and when the door finally closed behind her, it felt like the house exhaled a long-held breath. Isabella and Marco stayed upstairs, their hurt simmering beneath the surface, but I knew they needed time to process everything. That evening, I sat in the kitchen nursing a glass of whiskey. The house was still, the weight of years of lies finally lifting. It wasn't a feeling of triumph, not exactly. It was more like the clarity that comes after a storm, the calm realization that the worst had passed. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The next phase of my plan involved the wider network of people who had facilitated Mira and Romano's betrayal. Their actions had rippled through my life, compounding the hurt and deception. They weren't innocent bystanders, they had actively contributed to the lies, and they wouldn't escape the fallout. I started with Philippe. Word of his involvement had already begun spreading through the firm. As my evidence circulated, it became clear that his role went beyond simply covering for Mira. He had falsified billing records and misused firm resources to create alibis for her and Romano. The managing partners had little tolerance for such behavior. By the end of the week, Philippe had been terminated. His wife, Maria, filed for divorce shortly afterward. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd found the receipts and emails, the same ones I'd handed over to the firm. Filippe's world unraveled just as thoroughly as Mira and Romano's. Next, I turned my attention to Dr. Andrea Birch, the couple's therapist who had counseled Mira and Romano in secret. The evidence Thelma had uncovered was damning. Emails between Mira and Dr. Birch revealed years of unethical behavior, including sessions where the therapist had actively coached them on maintaining their affair without getting caught. It was a blatant violation of professional ethics. I forwarded the evidence to the state medical board along with a formal complaint. Within weeks, Dr. Birch's license was revoked. Her practice shuttered and her reputation was destroyed. The clients she'd once counseled fled, unwilling to associate with someone so thoroughly discredited. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I read the news. Meanwhile, Mira and Romano were scrambling to salvage what was left of their lives. Romano's disbarment had been swift, the evidence of his professional misconduct leaving no room for doubt. His name became synonymous with scandal, and no firm would touch him. His lavish lifestyle disappeared overnight. The private jets, the designer suits, the exclusive memberships, all gone. I heard through Nell Stewart, my divorce attorney, that Romano had relocated to a modest rental condo in Reno. He was working as a consultant for a small-town law firm, handling minor cases that barely covered his bills. The man who once exuded power and confidence was now just another disgraced lawyer, scraping by on what little remained of his reputation. Mira fared no better. Her role in the scandal had tainted her legal career. She tried to rebuild her practice in Nevada, but the shadow of her actions followed her. No prestigious firm would hire her, and her attempts to open an independent practice failed spectacularly. Like Romano, she had traded everything for a life of shame and regret. The real turning point came with the children. Isabella and Marco had always been close to their mother, but the truth shattered that bond. Isabella, in particular, struggled to reconcile the image of the woman she'd idolized with the reality of her betrayal. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, Isabella turned to me. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "why did Mom do it? Why would she lie to us for so long?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love," I said. "Your mother thought she was protecting you, but in the end she was protecting herself." "She didn't protect us," Isabella said, her eyes flashing with anger. "She just ruined everything." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than she gave you credit for," I said, "and you don't have to let her choices define you." Marco was quieter in his grief. He clung to me in ways he hadn't since he was a toddler, seeking reassurance and stability. I made a point to be present for him, attending every soccer game, every school event. He needed to know that I wasn't going anywhere, that I would always be there for him. Mira and Romano's attempts to reconnect with the children were met with resistance. Marco refused to speak to Romano at all, and Isabella kept her interactions with Mira brief and distant. During one supervised visitation, Isabella confronted Romano directly. "You used us," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Every tennis lesson, every school event, it was all just part of your plan. You don't care about us. You only cared about yourself." Romano tried to defend himself, but his words fell flat. The damage was done, and the children had made their choice. Months passed, and the pieces of our lives began to settle into a new normal. Isabella channeled her anger into her studies, excelling in her schoolwork and tennis. Marco found solace in coding, immersing himself in projects that gave him a sense of control and purpose. As for me, I focused on rebuilding our family. The genetic study that had uncovered the betrayal also became the foundation for new professional success. My research gained recognition in the scientific community, and I was promoted to Global Research Director. The work gave me a sense of purpose, but it was the time I spent with Isabella and Marco that truly mattered. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Isabella announced, "I've decided to study genetics in college. I want to help people understand where they come from and who they are." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. "You'll be amazing at it," I said, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew we'd face it together. The lies that had once bound us had been stripped away, replaced by a bond built on truth and resilience. And as I looked at my children, I knew that was the greatest victory of all. The months that followed brought both clarity and a sense of healing. Mira and Romano's worlds continued to collapse, while I focused on strengthening the bond with Isabella and Marco. Life had become simpler in many ways. The lies were gone, and though the truth had left scars, it also provided the foundation to rebuild. Mira attempted to reach out multiple times. Letters arrived sporadically, each one filled with apologies and justifications. I didn't read most of them. The ones I did skim were predictable, claims of love, regret, and misguided intentions. It was all hollow to me now. One evening, Isabella found one of the unopened letters on my desk. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "Why don't you read them?" she asked. "Because there's nothing she can say that will change what she did," I replied. "She made her choices. Now, we make ours." Isabella nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't want to see her anymore," she said quietly. "It just hurts too much." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's your decision to make. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Marco, meanwhile, didn't even ask about Mira. His silence spoke volumes. He had closed that chapter in his mind, focusing instead on his studies and hobbies. I admired his resilience, but I also worried about the walls he was building. I made a point to check in with him often, ensuring he knew he could talk to me about anything. Romano's attempts to reconnect with the children were even less successful. He'd sent gifts, a new tennis racket for Isabella, a gaming console for Marco, but neither child acknowledged them. When he called, the conversations were brief and strained. During one supervised visitation, Romano tried to appeal to Isabella's love of tennis. "I've spoken to a few coaches," he said. "I can help you get into a top-tier program. You have real potential." Isabella's response was cold. "I don't want your help. I'll get there on my own." Romano's expression faltered, but she didn't back down. "You don't get to use me to feel better about yourself," she added. "Not anymore." Marco didn't even attend the visitation. He stayed home with me, working on a coding project. When I asked if he wanted to talk about it, he simply shook his head. Despite their rejection of Mira and Romano, the kids thrived. Isabella poured her energy into school and tennis, earning top marks and competing in regional tournaments. She had reclaimed the sport for herself, stripping away its connection to Romano. Each victory was a testament to her determination and independence. Marco's interests veered toward technology. He taught himself programming, creating intricate projects that showcased his sharp mind. One evening, he presented me with a piece of software he'd designed, a program that analyzed patterns in financial records to detect fraud. "It's for people who've been lied to," he explained, "so they can find the truth." I couldn't help but smile. "You're going to help a lot of people with this, Marco." Professionally, my life took a sharp upward trajectory. The genetic study that had exposed the betrayal also became a groundbreaking contribution to hereditary research. It was published in a prestigious journal, earning accolades and opening doors to new opportunities. I was promoted to Global Research Director, a position that allowed me to influence the field on a larger scale. The irony wasn't lost on me. The study that had revealed Mira and Romano's deception had also secured my professional legacy. It was a bittersweet triumph, but one I embraced nonetheless. Mira and Romano, on the other hand, continued to struggle. Their hasty marriage, meant to solidify their relationship, quickly revealed its cracks. The financial strain of their new lives took a toll, and their love proved less resilient than they'd imagined. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Mira had taken a job as a paralegal in a strip mall law office. The woman who once commanded respect in high-powered legal circles now answered phones and filed paperwork for minor cases. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced with off-the-rack suits, and her confidence seemed to have vanished. Romano's fall was even more spectacular. The man who had once been a titan of the legal world was now reduced to handling small-time cases in a dusty Nevada office. His disbarment ensured he could never practice law in any meaningful capacity again. I learned that he was often seen at local grocery stores, clipping coupons and waiting in line like any other middle-class citizen. The mighty had truly fallen. One afternoon, Isabella approached me with a question. "Dad, Do you think they regret it? Mom and him? I considered her question carefully. I think they regret getting caught, I said. But I don't think they truly understand the damage they caused. People like them rarely do. Isabella nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'm glad we're not like them. You're nothing like them, I said firmly, and you never will be. As the first anniversary of Mira's departure approached, I reflected on how far we'd come. The lies that had once overshadowed our lives were gone, replaced by a newfound clarity. Isabella and Marco had grown stronger, more independent, and I couldn't have been prouder. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Isabella brought out a photo album. It was filled with pictures from before the truth came out, family vacations, birthdays, and holidays. She flipped through the pages slowly, her expression a mix of nostalgia and sadness. Do you think we'll ever have that again? She asked. We'll have something better, I said. Something real. She smiled, her eyes glistening. I like the sound of that. That night, as I lay in bed, I allowed myself a moment of peace. The battle was over, the truth had prevailed, and my children were thriving. Mira and Romano had paid the price for their deception, and their world would never recover. I wasn't the same man I had been a year ago. The betrayal had changed me, but it had also strengthened me. I'd learned that even in the face of unimaginable pain, there was a way forward. And for Isabella, Marco, and me, that path was brighter than ever. The second year after Mira's departure brought closure in ways I hadn't anticipated. Life for the kids and me had settled into a rhythm, a new normal where honesty and trust formed the foundation of our family. But there were still loose ends to tie up, and I was determined to see everything through to the end. The final legal proceedings between Mira and me were swift and merciless, thanks in large part to Nell Stewart. Her meticulous approach ensured that every aspect of the divorce worked in my favor. Mira's attempts to secure joint custody of Isabella and Marco crumbled under the weight of the evidence. In court, Nell presented the genetic tests alongside records of Mira and Romano's deception. The judge listened intently as Nell laid out the years of infidelity and the impact on the children. Mira's lawyer tried to argue for shared custody, claiming she had always been a loving mother, but the judge wasn't convinced. Your actions have shown a consistent pattern of deceit, the judge said, addressing Mira directly. The court cannot overlook the emotional harm caused by your choices. When the ruling came down, it was unequivocal. I was granted full custody of Isabella and Marco. Mira would have supervised visitation rights, but only if the children agreed to see her. Mira's face crumpled as the judge delivered the verdict, but I felt no pity. She had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. Romano, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. The State Bar Association concluded its investigation, issuing a permanent disbarment and a scathing public statement about his ethical violations. His name became a cautionary tale in legal circles, synonymous with betrayal and professional disgrace. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Romano had taken a consulting job at a small-town law office in Nevada. His once lavish lifestyle was gone, replaced by frugality and mediocrity. He lived in a modest condo, his designer suits replaced with clearance rack clothing. The man who had once exuded power now struggled to make ends meet. The children's rejection of Mira and Romano was perhaps the most profound consequence of their betrayal. Isabella and Marco had chosen to stay with me, severing ties with the people who had hurt them the most. Mira tried to rebuild her relationship with them, sending letters and gifts, but her efforts were met with silence. Marco refused to acknowledge her attempts, while Isabella responded only once, a single letter expressing her anger and disappointment. You lied to us, she wrote. You pretended to be someone you weren't, and you let someone else take Dad's place in our lives. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you for that. The letter marked the end of their communication. Mira's supervised visits dwindled to nothing. her absence in their lives becoming a reflection of the choices she'd made. Romano fared no better. He tried to reconnect with Isabella, offering to coach her in tennis and help with college applications, but she rebuffed him at every turn. "I don't want your help," she told him during their last phone call. "You don't get to claim credit for my achievements." Marco, for his part, refused to even speak to him. The bond Romano had tried to forge through gifts and attention had been irrevocably broken. Despite the scars left by Mira and Romano's betrayal, Isabella and Marco thrived. Isabella's focus on tennis and academics paid off, earning her a scholarship to a prestigious university. She reclaimed tennis for herself, stripping away its association with Romano. Every match she played was a testament to her resilience and determination. Marco, meanwhile, excelled in technology. His passion for coding grew into something extraordinary. He entered a national competition with his fraud detection software and won first prize, earning recognition from tech companies and universities alike. Watching them succeed brought me a deep sense of pride. They had taken the pain of their parents' betrayal and turned it into fuel for their own growth. One evening, Isabella approached me with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Dad, do you think Mom and Romano are happy now?" she asked. I considered her question carefully. "I think they thought they would be," I said. "But real happiness doesn't come from lies. It comes from living truthfully. And they've never been able to do that." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad we're not like them." "You're nothing like them," I said firmly. "And you never will be." In the years that followed, the ripples of Mira and Romano's betrayal continued to fade. Their attempts to rebuild their lives were met with limited success. Romano's disbarment ensured he would never regain the power and influence he once wielded. Mira's legal career remained stagnant, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. They married shortly after our divorce, clinging to the idea that their love could weather the storm. But the reality of their new lives quickly set in. Financial strain and social isolation took their toll, and their relationship began to crumble. The lavish life they had once dreamed of was replaced by arguments over bills and resentment for what they had lost. I heard through mutual friends that Mira had taken a job as a paralegal in a strip mall law office, while Romano handled minor legal disputes for a fraction of what he once earned. Their grand romance, built on lies and betrayal, had devolved into a hollow shell of its former self. For Isabella, Marco, and me, life moved forward. Isabella graduated high school with honors and was accepted into a top university where she planned to study genetics. Her personal essay about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in the truth earned her praise from admissions committees. Marco continued to excel in coding, earning a scholarship to a prestigious tech program. His software was being considered for implementation by a major firm, a testament to his talent and determination. As for me, my career in genetics flourished. The study that had exposed Mira and Romano's deception became a cornerstone of my professional success, earning accolades and opening doors to new opportunities. But my greatest achievement wasn't professional. It was personal. The bond I'd forged with Isabella and Marco, built on trust and honesty, was unbreakable. Together, we had rebuilt our lives, creating something far stronger than the lies that had once bound us. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isabella turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But whether we do or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we've built a life that's real, and no one can take that away from us." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the strength and resilience she'd found within herself. In the end, Mira and Romano's betrayal had revealed the truth. And while the truth had been painful, it had also set us free. As I looked at my children, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. Here's the next story. This is the day music perished. "Okay, baby, I need to leave." Morning shifts are exhausting, and I have to get up at 5:30. I glanced regretfully at the television, trying to recall her face. 5 more minutes. I asked like an 8-year-old youngster begging his parents for a little more time before bedtime. Please, I miss you so much. My wife smiled tiredly. I hated it so badly. She was a doctor, spending every day in the intensive care unit caring for patients, many of whom were on their last day on Earth. She sat down with me right away and explained everything exactly as it was. She was at risk of becoming infected with a virus. The hospital was trying to provide nurses, orderlies, cleaners, porters, and doctors with all of the necessary protective equipment to ensure their safety while working. But it wasn't enough. 2 staff members died. A Romanian physiotherapist who helped patients breathe deeply, and a South African nurse who had encountered practically every form of deadly injury in her career. They died within 10 days of each other, cared for by those with whom they had only recently dined. When things started to look awful, I asked Shauna to stay at home with me. When the news was full of reports of lockdowns, resource shortages, and mounting death tolls, I asked her, but with little hope. She was a doctor. It was her calling. She couldn't hide with me while her coworkers endangered their lives. It was impossible, but I asked anyhow. Shauna was furious with me for this, but she saw how much I loved her, which softened her stance. That was one thing. Second, and far more distressing, she informed me that we could not be together during quarantine. I adore you more than life itself, she remarked one evening as we lay naked in one another's arms. My heart is still thumping twice as quickly as normal. Then she proceeded. That is why I am going to live with Jill for the duration of the outbreak. My heart has stopped. Or so I thought. No, I exclaimed. This will not happen. She kissed me gently. Her dark eyes met mine, and I recognized love in their depths. Mike, what if I bring the sickness home and infect you? I will be unable to live with it. If you die, I will also die. Her tone was really serious. I can't leave my job, you know. They require every doctor and nurse. I didn't become a doctor to avoid doing what was necessary. You are aware of this as well. But given the possibility that I will become a carrier, I cannot risk infecting you. I'm willing to take the chance, I replied strongly. I stated it truly. She was everything for me, everyone. I no longer have a family. I am an orphan and the only child in my family. She was the only person I loved in the entire universe. You are strong, but I don't. She proceeded. If something bad happens to you as a result of my actions, I shall die from guilt. You are my boyfriend, soulmate, and star. I will not be able to survive if this star dies as a result of my actions. She said, I see this every day. People who are allowed to visit their dying loved ones in their final hours, they sit next to each other holding hands and desperately trying not to fall apart, while the person they love suffers and eventually gives up. And every one of them suspects that it was he who infected his wife, mother, father, and kid. They will feel guilty until the end of their lives. I cannot let this happen. She simply kept talking without giving me the opportunity to object. Jill and I decided to stay at her house, not far from the hospital, until everything was finished. We worked the same shifts half of the time, which allowed us to travel together, regardless of how much it hurts. We need to do this, honey. You know it is rational. Please deal with this. I can't risk your health. So you want me to be here alone? Fully isolated while you spend your life with your best friend, I complained. I sounded like a bitter child, but I was deeply insulted. It was the last thing I wanted throughout our 3-year marriage. It wasn't as young and glittering as a fairy tale dream, but neither was it as intense as that of couples celebrating their golden anniversary. You are exaggerating, she remarked. Please don't worsen my guilt. You know I don't want to be separated from you even for a second. However, you must exercise caution. Do you understand? Right? Please, let me know that you understand my desire for this. I felt absolutely torn inside. I was proud of her, her commitment to being a doctor and looking after her patients. But I also wanted her to be here with me, just as we promised each other when we married. But she was sorely required in a hospital, in a medical system where it appeared that half of the personnel was sick or had been forced to isolate with their families due to symptoms. But at the very least, these employees were at home with their families. So, why shouldn't we be together? When I mentioned this to her, she objected. They may exhibit symptoms, but this is not necessarily a serious sickness. It might simply be the flu or an allergy in general. Nobody can say for sure while they are isolated. But sweetheart, I see patients face to face every day, literally when they suffer a seizure, a fever, or a heart attack. I'm right there, inches away. Of course, I wear protective equipment, but my risk of infection is still higher than others. Jill, too. I understand, I murmured darkly, but I am not married to Jill. I feel like you're asking me to be a military wife while you go to war. You can't even go back on vacation. It appears that this could take up to a year. Are you asking me to sit here alone, worrying about you all the time? You'll have plenty of time to play your silly game, she joked. And I will not annoy you, stupid game. What audacity! It was a game of strategy, risk, chance, and big rewards. But that's the best part of the game, I lamented. I enjoy it when you divert me so we can spend time together. And all I can do now is wait alone for you. This may last forever. Furthermore, because you live with Jill, you are more likely to infect one another. If one of you contracts the virus, the hospital will lose 2 doctors rather than 1. This is illogical. It's part of what we agreed on when we became doctors, she said. We were aware of the risks. Nobody expected such a large-scale epidemic, but everyone knew it was conceivable. How does everyone know the oil will never run out, even though they recognize that this is unavoidable? I mumbled. By now, I was grumbling a lot under my breath. She nodded. That's correct. You always expect it to happen on someone else's shift. But now it's my turn, and I have to deal. You recognize me. I nodded and frowned. Yes. I knew her too well since we met in yoga class, became friends, then fell in love and married. I knew she felt a great sense of obligation. I sighed, possibly as deeply as when my parents died. I wanted to cry. When do you leave? I asked in pain. On Sunday evening, she took my face in her hands and gave me a deep, passionate kiss. I got the weekend off, and we need to spend time together. It's just you and me. She drew back and gazed into my eyes. This is not what I wanted, Mike. Do you understand? But this is what I need to do. In this new world, everything is changing, including us, I murmured quietly. No, she nearly yelled. Not us. We do not change. We deal with it. However, we remain the same as before. I don't feel it, I replied. It feels as if I was judged for something I did not accomplish. I feel like I could be in Les Miserables right now. I couldn't stop. I knew I sounded like the most capricious, juvenile, and selfish person. But I couldn't help myself. We can manage it, honey, she said. We're strong. We love each other. We believe in one another. We can manage anything. That's how it was that weekend, when Shauna transformed our days into more than just a honeymoon, like a first date for 2 12-year-olds. By Sunday evening, I was tired and could only utter one more symbolic protest. Please do not depart, I remarked, as she grabbed her belongings, refusing to allow me leave the apartment to help her put them into the car. She kissed me again, leaving only a faint trace of her perfume. She vanished. 2 months later, I begged for another 5 minutes. It was our little game, which started shortly after she moved into Jill's house. After each shift, we communicated via Skype, WhatsApp, Snapchat, or whichever app worked best on the congested networks of the time. So please, my darling, 5 more minutes. I can't, sweetheart. I'm totally exhausted. I will call you tomorrow. Love you. And then she vanished. However, That is not the case. She leaned closer to the keyboard, pressed a key, and the noise on her side subsided, but the camera remained active. She turned off the screen but not the transmission. I watched and cried, then held back and cried for another hour. She was initially delighted about helping patients, but after a few weeks, I saw that her face was becoming increasingly fatigued. I became really concerned and requested that she do a virus test in my presence. He was negative. I forced her to take at least some time for herself, rather than working herself to exhaustion. Now I understood she might not have gotten enough sleep. She was too busy. I sent her a quick message, took a couple of her sleeping pills, and went to bed. I knew I'd have to get up eventually. Despite my brain's complaints, my bladder insisted on waking me up so I could remain in the secure fortress of slumber where nothing could harm me. The sun hadn't yet risen, and I gazed out the window at the vacant streets. When we initially came here, there were already lines of automobiles on the road. Now there is only the occasional jogger, someone hurrying with a few shopping bags or a taxi, taking someone to a clinic. The world has lost its previous significance. I knew that without daily online sessions with Shayna, the days would blur together and lose their contours. Time will become irrelevant. I brewed coffee and switched on the computer overnight. I devised a scheme while I was asleep. It wasn't precisely a plan, but it was preferable to nothing. With plenty of spare time and no worries about my wife, I resolved to improve my game. My fingers rapidly filled up with requests to enter the game and join a guild or something. I was determined to use this to prevent myself from going insane. However, I may get 1 or 2 cats so they can have pals. I began downloading the advanced edition of my game, made sure my guild confirmation had arrived, and then removed all of Shauna's belongings from the bedroom. Soon, the narrow bed in our guest room, which was only used when we had visitors, was littered with her clothes, toiletries, shoes, medical uniforms, and abandoned safety equipment. When I finished, I shut the door. A symbolic conclusion to this chapter of my life. As a newbie, I started from scratch. It was bizarre. In a society where loneliness has become the norm, I needed more solitude. The most effective method to accomplish this is to fill my thoughts to capacity. Allow the murky shadows of pain to crawl into my mind, inflicting another wound on my spirit. I cut off all communication channels with the outside world, including the phone and computer. With the exception of the game itself, I focused on tactics and timing. It was a PvP game in which each player competed against everyone other. Shauna called it a silly game, but I used to play it for joy. But now things are becoming serious. There was only one more thing to accomplish before beginning to explore a new world. I called a local television station and inquired whether they had any footage of a recent occurrence that had most likely occurred nearby. They were glad to direct me to the clip on their website. Of course, with pleasure, they were proud of the incident. I watched the video with gritted teeth. Then I entered into the game and began reading about minor moves that allowed me to amass in-game assets. They were required for greater operations. Everything depends on meticulous preparation and timing. When I stepped out into the living room, unshaven and naked, Shauna was seated on the sofa. I scratched my buttocks and moved by her into the kitchen to turn on the coffee. She sat slumped over and pale, nodding to her along the way. I got courage. Seeing her dead inside was undoubtedly part of the grieving process, but having a corpse who appeared to want to talk about his mistakes was terrifying. She finally replied, "I received your message. Yet, you are here." I responded calmly. "You did not understand him." "Of course I understand. But this is my house." I objected. "This is my house. Your house?" I waved my hand. "Somewhere you share it with your closest pals." "You're my best friend," she said. "I removed you from my friends list. I believed my message made it clear that it was not you who was speaking." She spoke quietly. I'm not sure what you saw or heard, but it was not you. This is your fury, not your love. I turned on the television because I missed her greatly. I recorded our online talks and watched them multiple times the following day. It made me feel slightly less alone. I pushed the play button. Her face was displayed on the screen in high definition. Shauna was looking at the camera. Her lovely lips murmured, "I will call you tomorrow. Love you." She leaned forward, and the sound diminished as she hit a few buttons while appearing depressed. Two hands rested on her shoulders. She looked up and gave a tired smile. The owner of the hands squatted down, placed his chin on her shoulder, and slid his hands down. I hit pause and stared at her. "I didn't hear anything," I said. Her face grew white as she looked wide-eyed at the motionless image on the television. "But I did saw a lot. This is why I sent the message. So who is this person that can approach you from behind and touch you while I can't even see you in person? Or did you aim to infect me with a virus and then get rid of me?" The punch to the face surprised me. She tried it again. I grabbed her wrist and pushed her back in the chair. She burst into tears. "Do not do that again!" I placed an order. "How can you think like that?" she screamed through tears. "I was mistaken, but it does not imply I wish you dead. This is the worst thing you have ever said to me. And this," I pointed at the screen, "which is the most horrible, awful, and nasty thing you or anybody else has ever done to me. I didn't do it for spite or to be harsh. I love you." I played the video until they started kissing. "Yes, you're correct. Now I realize this is your love for me. She is here, so obviously manifested." I rewound the recording to the point where his hands first appeared in the frame. "Shauna, these are his hands. They approach from your left side. I see how you're fighting with him. Out of affection for me. Oh no, wait, you do not fight at all. You lean into his warm arms. Damn it. You were talking to me as he sat on your bed, eager to have sex with you. You told me how much you loved me while he was most likely messing around, waiting for the next time you cheated. This isn't an error. This was not an accident. He's here. He appears to be at ease and relaxed. He knows he's going to get you. He does not have to chase your body. He owns a season ticket for it. Everything I see indicates that this is not the first time. This isn't an error." She shook her head violently. Her eyes darted everywhere but at me. "Who is he?" "This is Reg," she whispered slowly with a sad voice. "Reg Varney is one of the doctors at the facility. The name meant nothing to me. I have never heard of it. I discovered another footage which I obtained from a local television station. It was a little video of the exterior of her hospital. Many physicians, nurses, and other staff gathered outside the main door, cheering as commentators mentioned the nation's regular Thursday round of applause for health professionals. I paused the video and used the remote to focus on one of the groups. There you are. And I believe it's Jill. A mask is worn by the person next to you, and the man behind you is Dr. Varney, the person who hugs you both. She stared at the television, and then at me. Finally, she nodded. He definitely feels at ease standing with his hands practically on your chest. He virtually declares to the entire world that you both belong to him. Is he sleeping with you both? "Michael, please," she began. "Shauna, please." I mimicked her. "Jill isn't married. So, how about everyone's favorite Casanova? Is he free to have anyone he chooses? Is he free to target women with a clear conscience? Especially married couples who use the outbreak as an excuse to add some excitement, women who lie and cheat to have sex. Is it now popular to have threesomes? Are you the only one who is cheating on me?" My words started to scare me. I disliked the person she forced me to become. I've always considered myself a good guy. I might have lost, like most good guys, but at least I was at peace with myself. At least until it landed on me. Now I felt hatred, rage, venom, and a want to hurt escaping from my throat and spilling out into my narrow, limited world. I felt horrible as she looked down at her hands after hearing the last question. Seriously, I whispered. The three of us. You, him, and Jill. Lord, you did everything to make his hopes come true. Didn't you? That made things even worse. As if the betrayal wasn't enough to create the worst nightmare I could imagine. I stared at her. She gazed at me briefly before averting her gaze. Anger bubbled within me. I needed her to comprehend my feelings. I rewinded the first video and reset the timer. When we last chatted, I begged you for 5 more minutes online. Only 5 minutes. You mentioned that you were weary and should sleep because you had to get up early. Mike, she started. Shut the hell up, I shouted. I requested for 5 minutes. I begged you for 300 seconds, but you were meant to sleep. Remember? You should have slept. I began recording again. Our voices were still unmuted at the time. Come on, honey. Only 5 minutes. I cannot, honey. I am fatigued. I will call you tomorrow. I love it. I hit rewind, and the movie accelerated as they rose and moved off frame to the right. Barney halted, only to remove his trousers and underwear. She emerged moments later, at 34 seconds, according to the on-screen timer, removing her uniform and panties before disappearing onto the bed. Only the close corner of the bed was visible, and for a minute or two, nothing unusual happened. I then allowed the video to continue while Shauna sobbed with her face in her hands. I believe it is one thing to face charges of cheating, but it is another different to examine the proof. I was going to have her watch for 5 minutes, I repeated. I begged you for 5 minutes. You couldn't spare that much. But you patiently waited 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 37 seconds to gain 2 seconds from him. So that is why I do not care about you. I had always thought of you as the pinnacle of the ideal woman. And it's incredibly upsetting because I realize that ideal women don't exist. You were clever, gorgeous, determined, and the most dignified person I'd ever encountered. And now I understand that you are simply a woman of easy virtue and a dumb one at that. Someone who couldn't even switch off the computer to protect her husband from the pain of your lies and betrayal. Shauna replied, You don't understand. What exactly don't I understand? I inquired, really intrigued. You don't know what it's like. Every day I get up and go to the hospital, knowing that it is frequently a battle against a plainly losing foe, this virus. My team and I fight with all of our power, knowledge, and resources, including all available drugs and technologies. However, we continue to endure defeats. The stress is immense. She waved her hand at the screen. It was just a stress reliever, she explained. Some of the crew drank to block out the recollections. Some people eat without pausing. Others break down. As a doctor, I saw that it was self-destructive, more self-destructive than selling yourself out in cheap betrayal. It wasn't true cheating, she responded. There was no feeling present. It was just a method to survive, a method to deal with another day on the front lines. I sympathize. She stared at me. Hopefully. Is this true? No, absolutely not. If this were a recognized approach, the Army would send prostitute regiments to Basra every week, as well as facilities for PTSD. All of the nurses would be naked and prepared to collapse on their backs at any time. Are you suggesting you've found a new approach to treat PTSD? She remained silent for a long time. No, she finally replied. Shauna, 2 months have elapsed. When did you allow this imbecile to live with you? And don't pretend that he didn't live with you. He has a robe on. No man wears a robe for casual sex with local ladies of easy virtue. Please stop calling me that. Certainly, as soon as you demonstrate that you were never like that. It is not. I do not. Come on, Shauna. You knew from my message that I had discovered every detail of your cheap and disgusting betrayal. But you weren't in a hurry to get home and try to mend things. You definitely spent time coming up with excuses and explanations, and that is the best you can do. When did you let him in? Approximately 5 weeks ago. So 3 weeks on an iron diet. Couldn't you even go 3 weeks without sex? No, but sure, I could. It didn't start immediately. So, 2 weeks ago. It's comforting to learn that you lied to me and only slept with him for 2 weeks. God, 2 weeks are nothing. This is not a betrayal of marital vows, right? I hit play again, and our voices resumed. Her face was smiling at me from the screen. Come on, honey, only 5 minutes, I cannot. Honey, I am fatigued. I will call you tomorrow. I love it. I pushed the rewind button again and replayed that bit. She finally yelled enough. Please, Michael, I know exactly what I did. I broke your heart and mind simultaneously. I simply didn't know it at the time. How could you not realize this the first time he touched you? Because I was depressed. I lost 4 patients that day. He held me, and it felt wonderful to feel human touch. That was nice. He probably felt, you are also pretty good. No, it was not like that. Until it is gone. She wanted to object, but it would be a lie. We both knew it. Eventually, the tight silence grew suffocating. So what happens now? She asked cautiously. I am afraid to hear the response. And now nothing. What do you mean? We don't have anywhere to go anymore. It is over. She crossed the room and crouched down beside me. Please do not mention that. Please. I will do whatever it takes. We can fix anything. We can fix anything. That's just what you claimed before embarking on your noble mission to save lives wherever possible. I reminded them that they could handle it. We're strong. You stated that we believe in each other. I rubbed my hands over my face, attempting to suppress the feelings that were bursting out. You've probably done it. I resumed after a brief pause. I didn't even get the chance to try, and I was strong. But you weren't. I believed in you, but you proved me wrong. This is a one-sided farce. Sorry, I was mistaken. I was weak. I made an error. When do you need to return? I asked tomorrow. At least that's what they desire. Her voice trailed off. So you aren't sorry enough to stay? You aren't remorseful enough to try to save an already dead marriage? Are you not sad enough to stay away from dear old Regine? It isn't because of Regina. She responded sharply, almost yelling. It was a method of relieving stress that you might not have been able to do yourself. No, it is. I tried, but it was impossible. I couldn't do it alone. My thoughts were always drawn back to the patients at the appropriate times. So, Regina's magic wand or nothing. You couldn't even come home to see me for at least one evening. Why was this excluded? Why was I not good enough? Yes, it was. It was simply a moment of weakness. I couldn't return to you and risk becoming infected. Oh, I yelled. You're here now. What's changed? I made them take a test. I have not worked since you saw, since you left the message. I had to wait 3 days to be sure I wasn't a carrier. This is the fastest way I could get to you safely. You may tell it like it is. I was so enraged that my fists remained squeezed between my knees, since I witnessed you having sex with that moron twice. Twice in one session. Damn, twice. What? Are you still stressed after the first time? Perhaps a dozen patients perished after the first time, and it generated so much stress that you simply required more stress alleviation. Is that what you want me to believe? Jill was on duty, and the wonderful doctor refused to participate in a threesome. No, that is not what I am saying. I'm attempting to respond to your inquiries, but you keep altering them. Please let me clarify. Okay, in order. When did the lovely Regina initially move in with you? 5 weeks ago. Just as I said, he hit on you for the first time. She paused for a moment before answering droopingly. 4 weeks ago, he gave me a cup of tea and massaged my shoulders. Would he have done this if I were there? You should massage me. You have done this before. That is not what I am asking. No, not about that, she admitted, sadly. And I wouldn't. I would not let him. So, Why did you allow it? Is it simply because I was not present? I do not know. I didn't think about what he was doing. I was only thinking about how it felt. You accomplished it, and I felt fantastic. I simply let it happen. How considerate of you. What were the next steps? What do you mean by his next step? What did he do following that? A few days later, he embraced and kissed me. He apologized and said that it was an automatic move. He did it with his wife. So he is married? Yes. I thought I had already discussed this. His wife is aware that he lives with 2 people. What are you calling it? Rough. Okay, let us be honest. Has 2 mistresses. She glanced at me fiercely. I didn't hit her, which I regarded as a victory against my rage. I don't know, she responded gently. Note to self. Inform Mrs. Magical Regine that her husband is cheating. Why would you do that? It might devastate their marriage. And what? Why should I care? What if they have children? Then I believe the likelihood of having further children will be very minimal. Why is this bothering you? I just want to protect your sweetheart. She looked as if I had hit her. No. God, no. So you won't mind if I remove him from your circle? I believe the police would have intervened since I couldn't kick him as hard as I wanted. I do not have the same advantages as you magnificent doctors. They are fulfilling their God-given mission by having sex with each other at will. Who are you anyway? She blurted out. So what happened to my husband? You've never been a more nasty, terrible person. Now I am, I snapped, and I have every justification for it. Don't you think? Let's sum up. At your urgent request, I am forced to stay at home alone virtually 24/7 while my wife joyfully sleeps with other doctors, men and women, carefully keeping me in the dark and feeding me rubbish like a mushroom to deceive me. How can this not alter my perspective on life? She looked stunned. This was not anything I had planned. You cannot believe I did this on purpose. How could I think otherwise? I reminded the video. Would you like to see how you having fun? Let us take a look together. Maybe this will turn me into a real cuckold. Maybe it will turn me on. I may wish to wear a muzzle mask. You can humiliate and destroy me even further. What about a cage? Her face contorted with fear. Don't you believe it? Whatever it is, don't think of me that way. I'd never do it. I am already a cuckold, I shouted. You've made me one. You! I had no say in this decision. It was all your will. You did it on purpose, repeatedly. What would be the next significant step? She crawled back, gripping her knees, her back against the sofa. Sorry. I apologize. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, resisting the impulse to strike her on the way. I was always taught not to harm children, ladies, or the weak, and I adhered to this idea. However, the desire was overwhelming. This time, I brewed 2 cups of tea. I'm going through all of the possible mantras in my thoughts to attempt to calm down. As my mind returned to a more normal condition, I began to question why she was still here. Why do you cause so much destruction and then stay to witness the broken remains? Does she truly believe we can repair this? Or am I incorrect in believing that we cannot? When the tea was ready, I poured it into cups while trying not to throw the plates against the kitchen wall. After delivering her the cup, I returned to my seat, pleased that I hadn't damaged any plates. So, where are we left? I sighed and took a couple drinks. This helped a little. She murmured, I don't know any more. Will you allow me to continue the interrogation, or will you leave? Do whatever you want, she responded in a bland tone. I loathed both her and myself. I could not decide who was bigger. No, I already knew. Most of all, I detested Regina. You know, there's a way to keep you here and answer questions until I'm certain I know the truth. I can leave, but I do not want to. If I notified your employer at the hospital that we were being divorced, and you made it apparent to me that you were trying to get infected on purpose as a form of retribution for the virus, what do you think they will do? Her face contorted in fear again. I will be removed from working with COVID patients immediately. This will be recorded in my personal files. Why are you even considering this? Will it hurt you? Certainly. What if everyone starts to believe you're a coward, a liar, a cheat, and a terrible doctor? Could you imagine? It will be a true nightmare. Please. Her voice broke, and she moaned. I'd never heard this before. Now you understand how I feel, not for the same reasons, but with equal levels of pain relief. Her face revealed the knowledge that this was an intellectual provocation rather than a practical plan. Okay, I said abruptly, feeling really exhausted. My eyes began to close as I forced them open. She stared at me, concerned. So where are we? Oh, absolutely. A kiss during a pandemic. That was a smart move. What happened next? Next? During your seduction? What else do you suppose I mean? I clarified, gloomily. My old friend reacted angrily, as if she were grasping my hand. More kisses? Probably. Perhaps I was correct about the virus retribution after all. I shook my head, disgusted by her foolishness. Social separation is meaningless to doctors, right? We were both dressed in hazmat suits, so I interrupted her. She was always clever if she determined to deceive. My only hope of discovering the truth would be to keep her on edge. Are they the same protective suits you didn't trust to keep me from getting infected? Doctors are now considered special, correct? No, it was stupid. However, as it happened and grew easier, it became ordinary. Like a simple kiss, which I would give you. Never make that comparison again. Do not compare me to him. If you do that, I'll kick you out the door faster than someone playing Snap on PCP. The kiss you would give me. But you intentionally made this impossible by isolating me, correct? It was not intended to cut you off. This was to keep you safe from infection. You are aware of this. In reality, when I think about it, all I know is what I see on this screen. Everything else I've learned has come from your words. And you lied to me. I did not lie to you. I watched the beginning of the video again. Come on, honey. Only 5 minutes. I can't, honey. I'm exhausted. I will call you tomorrow. I love it. Was that not a lie? That sounds like a lie. I mean, within 5 minutes, you were brewing a storm and preparing for the encore. You couldn't give me 5 minutes because you needed to scratch that itch for more than an hour straight. I am honestly astonished that you answered the phone. I'm just the man you're intended to love, not the one you're now with. So, what was it? Simply lie to the moron to get him out of the way and continue having fun with a genuine man. Shauna bolted out of the room, and I heard her vomit in the bathroom. I stepped over and rested against the doorframe, staring at her slumped back and shivering from vomiting. Are you experiencing morning sickness? I asked. Doesn't it seem like only Mommy knows? She glanced at me with the same horrified expression on her face. I was so sick of everything that I couldn't help but push her away and take her seat at the toilet. Cold chills raced through my body as I went to my bed, lay down on it, and thankfully fell asleep when I woke up. Shauna sat next to me on the bed, wiping my forehead and taking my pulse. I cannot have a virus. I haven't left my apartment in 4 weeks. Nobody else came here. She nodded. I know you contact me every day save the last 4. You should have told me. I started to get up, but she softly pushed me back. Honestly, I believe it is a delayed shock. Another wound I created. I managed to transform my lovely, loving hubby into a seething monster. I would never have imagined that this was feasible. But I never thought I'd cheat on you. She took my hand in both of hers, tossed it a few times as if to weigh it, and groaned. I accomplished what should have been impossible. I took a man who loved me wholeheartedly and transformed it into hatred that made him sick. It's on me. I didn't want this, but it turned out that way. I guess being around so much mortality gave me the impression that I had the right to experiment with life in its most basic form. I realize this is stupid. Reg was quite convincing in his seduction, gradually tightening the screws until they were tight. So much so that I felt unable to reject. I could kick him out of the house, visit you, or even stay in the hospital. I had options, but I was stupid and didn't use them, just allowing him to take me. He had already slept with Jill, and I may have felt left out. It does not matter. I was weak and made numerous mistakes. To be really honest, they are not even mistakes. I did not strive for it. I simply let it happen. Most likely, it is inertia. It looked as if I was in a whole different universe, one without a husband, parents, or relatives, and everything was covered in fog. Only the rooms and patients were authentic. The rest seemed more like a dream. I would come home, eat, sleep with Reg or Jill, or both, and then fall asleep to return to reality. The world that actually mattered. That is no excuse. And I'm very sure that was not a mental illness. It was a sort of break from real life. I made some extremely stupid judgments, largely to do nothing and halt what was going on. It was a form of disease. So maybe I should talk to psychologists. Despite the fact that it was wrong, these stupid judgments caused me to lose the person I loved. This led to me abandoning the person I loved. She patted my hand and kissed my forehead. So if you kiss me one more time, I'll grant the first part of your desire and get the heck out. I probably won't die till the pandemic is over. Perhaps I can still be of use. I do not know. The craving has nearly faded down, but we shall see. Where are you going? I asked, the vestiges of my wrath at her acts, fighting the horror of seeing her leave for good. My stomach felt as if I had an ulcer. This is very feasible. I'll return to Jill and kick Reg out of the house. I doubt he will resist much. He may easily find fools in the world. However, he may reconsider when I submitted those films to his wife this morning, along with my groveling apologies for how severely I had hurt you. I no longer saw a reason to spare him. I suppose I'm a pain doctor who goes around harming the men I love. If you don't have anywhere to stay, come back. I suggested we were finished. But I don't want to see you in the street. Damn, the rest of the country is lynching me. They now much admire you, doctors. She burst into tears. No, I can't go back. Never. Not following what I did and what you said. I adore you, yet it appears that you love me but cannot abide me. You loathe me. And once again it is my fault. With such a damaged heart, you will always be the patient I am unable to cure. I snatched my brilliant star and extinguished it. Her cries were pathetic. Her heart is as broken as mine. I can't stay here either, I explained. I decided to purchase myself an apartment. It will be tough for you to obtain a mortgage. She sobbed. You are on welfare. It's unclear how long it will endure. I'll send as much money as I can. I shook my head as tears welled up in my eyes again. After all of this, her small gesture of generosity was the only thing that could break me completely. No, don't. By then, I'll most likely owe you a significant sum of money. She lifted her eyebrow. My stupid game. This is actually day trading. I practiced a lot while you were away. After I discovered the truth. I quit playing registered, and now I make a good living. Following the divorce, you should have enough money to buy your own property. Damn. She exhaled. Another mistake on my part. Now I can't even claim to be a fortune digger. My reputation as a woman of easy virtue and libertine will be shattered. I gazed at her with a sad expression. What else can I do? She struck herself harder than I ever could. I reached out to her. She pressed into me, so I kissed her, trying to express all of the love I'd ever felt. All I had left. I was attempting to show the only person in the world who I loved how badly I'd miss her. It appeared she was attempting to do the same. After a while, she stood up, took the suitcase in which she had packed her belongings, blew me a kiss, and went. Sadness could be read in every line on her body. I heard the door closing. Death is the end of love. During times of plague, I was left alone. Being alone is horrible, but it is better than nothing. I was about to end the night, close the many blinking windows on 3 monitors, displaying graphs in green and red that are continually updating. Knocks on the door to my apartment were unusual. mainly because I had a doorbell and was typically only visited by couriers who never arrived so late. When I mention women, I mean female couriers. I'll explain because they were the only female-represented lifestyles with whom I had touch for over a year. I was married, although it was only yesterday, last week, or even last year. It had become so out of style in my life. It's easier for me to think this way than to recall how I had to divorce a lying, cheating monster, avoiding women in general. I spent those months playing my own game, my MMO game. It was enormous and really multiplayer. And thank God I didn't have to leave the flat at all. The stock market was a global game, a zero-sum game in which every gain by one participant was offset by a loss by another, typically among a large number of small participants urgently attempting to make a reasonable bet. However, failing is more common than success. I've been on the winning side for the majority of this year. I feel a little awful about taking money away from these little investors. However, lately my ideas have become cloudy. My eyes frequently strained and watered from staring at monitors for 18 to 20 hours a day. Profits started to drop. The knock was repeated, and I reluctantly chose to respond. Rubbing my eyes, I approached the window, pulled aside the curtain, and gazed out. I would describe it as a gut hit. The sensation of being hit forcefully in the chest, exactly under the sternum, so hard that your abdominal muscles become paralyzed and you panic, believing you can't breathe and never will again. This was accompanied with tingling skin from neck to ears and an almost overwhelming want to hide in a closet. Sledge. The word is merely 5 letters long, so plain and ordinary. But how could I describe what I felt when I heard that name? Confusion, depression, anxiety, rage, fear, and even discomfort. Just hearing her name triggered a flood of emotions in me, comparable to how you might feel if someone arrives at a party with a 500-pound gorilla. This has not happened to me yet. But I can image standing there, speaking, with a glass of cocktail in one hand and a phone in the other, which you don't have, and then turning around to see this monster next to you. And no matter how many times this moron assures everyone that the gorilla is quite friendly, the shock will strike the crowd in the same way it did me. I hadn't seen her in about 10 months, when she left our apartment following a particularly vicious, angry dispute about her infidelity. Verbal poison spewed from my mouth like a spewing serpent. My agony and grief transformed me into someone we didn't know or love. Lawyers and judges split us and our property without regard. After we signed a separation agreement, I was as generous as promised. So I was astonished when the court rebalanced in my favor, given that my wife, a doctor with a proven career and salary, and I, an office manager without a steady employment due to the national quarantine, had less financial security. Despite my success in the worldwide casino, I traded on the stock exchange. Of course, most traders would prefer not to use that term when discussing stock market investments. But I'll call a spade a spade. All I see online is a violent gambling club where addicts rely on others to wager for them. To be honest, I expected the opposite from the court, and I was prepared to be torn apart by legal sharks. This slight move in my favor altered my attitude toward others, but not towards Reg. I still despised him with every fiber of my being. Seeing him on screen, taking advantage of my wife so calmly and confidently, destroyed something inside me forever. And now she was standing outside my door. "Open the door, Mac." I loved her contralto voice. Nothing surprised me more than her appearance. And I bent down below the window. Then, feeling like a dumb child hiding on his knees, he rose back up. "Leave." "No, I've got something for you." "Let me in." "No." I heard her sigh deeply. "I won't go until I give you this. So you'd better get this over with immediately. Whatever it is, I do not need it. And I do not need it from you." There was a lengthy gap before she spoke again. This time, her voice sounded scratchy and muffled, like if she had cried. "Please, David, I need to do something for you." When she addressed me by name rather than my nickname, I recognized she was serious. "Come tomorrow. I yelled, immediately standing at the door, pressing my palms against the wood. I quickly removed my hands as if they had been scorched, realizing I was trying to get closer to her. Damn it. No! To hell with it. To hell. To hell. To hell. She should not have been in my life anymore. I had to forget her and the anguish she caused. Okay. Shauna said I had nowhere else to go. And it is extremely cold here. But I'll wait here until morning and then try again. This got me upset, so I yelled as I opened the door and pushed away the security chain. This is emotional blackmail, you bitch. I am not going to. I froze as she pierced my arm. I gazed in her eyes. So familiar. Such stunning eyes. And then looked down. She even had an alcohol wipe to disinfect the injection site. Even though it was done through my sweater, she pulled her arm and wiped her skin. What have you done to me? I whispered, feeling weak and dropping to my knees. Thinking I'd been poisoned or drugged, I was certain my legs were giving way and my pulse was racing as I tried to flush the poison from my system. Shauna took my hand and helped me get to my feet. You have always been afraid of needles. Calm down. You are not dying, she murmured calmly as she entered the flat, hung up her coat and hat and closed the door behind her. I was too surprised to object. Everything that was happening felt completely pointless to me. It wasn't every day that my ex-wife, whom I didn't want to see, stormed into the flat and stabbed me with something. When she closed the door, she opened it abruptly, staring at me in shock. What's the smell? She squeezed out. What's the smell? It smells like a landfill. I looked around. I smelled nothing. The sausages and beans I ate for lunch and dinner had a slight fragrance. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have left leftovers on pots and dishes as I normally do, but I had more important things to accomplish. The flat was a touch messy, but compared to a garbage dump, I wasn't intending on throwing a party here, I snapped angrily. Please forgive me if this is a bit disorganized. A little mess would be an improvement, she said, squinting as if to shield her eyes from an unpleasant sight. Shauna stepped forward and gazed into the living room. The apartment is wonderful. I said, be quiet. Unless my neighbor rattles milk bottles on purpose in the morning, it seems to irritate me. She did not respond, instead walking towards the kitchen and instantly backing away, placing her palm to her nose. She gave me a quick glance before continuing to look around. Her critical looks began to bother me. Shauna, what the hell were you injecting me with? So what do you need? You do not belong here. This is my apartment, so leave. She ignored my statements and moved around me to stand directly in front of me. I need a hug. No, come on. We were previously friendly. She came forward and hugged me, snuggling for a bit. Her hands slid along my back and briefly touched my chest. I let me rest. I didn't let thoughts of our love's disintegration ruin this moment. Instead, I cherished her hug. It's a shame I didn't detect her familiar aroma, her perfume. But this presumably meant she wasn't attempting to seduce me. My head was still cloudy, like if something was keeping me from concentrating and I had no idea why she was there. I pushed her away. Enough. First and foremost, what did you inject me with? Her eyes swept across my face, and she attentively studied me from head to toe. I turned away slightly, feeling uncomfortable amid quarantine and seclusion. I got out of shape and probably resembled a slob. She exhaled. The single-dose COVID vaccination. I frowned. I am not in the priority age group. There is one additional dose left in the hospital. I cannot conceive of anyone greater than you. What? Not even Dr. Ron. Reg? Rod. What is his name? Her eyelids closed briefly, as if in anguish. I have not seen him since. How did you last sleep with him? I abruptly interrupted her. However, since this is no longer my business, you are not required to respond. She lowered her head and glanced up at me again. I have not seen Reg since I last saw you, so why should I believe you? She shrugged, her expression despairing. I assumed your rage had subsided after I left. It appeared to me that you had already experienced everything. Yes. Well, it's the outcome of watching your wife, who promised to love you forever and faithfully, have sex in front of you. It doesn't simply go away. She closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. Then she nodded. Fair. Okay. Second, why did you believe that I wanted the vaccine and could be forced to take it? I spent a long time trying to get a dose for you. I constantly stated I didn't want you to get infected, and it drove me insane knowing it might happen at any time. Now I can relax. So, who is your doctor now? Tell me. I'll contact him or her and accept whatever punishment the medical board imposes. I don't know Stuart Fairfax. I don't recall, Mac. Dr. Fairfax died 3 years ago. So, someone from their practice, I can't remember. I became your therapist after that. Do you remember who you signed up with following our divorce? I stared at her, mouth gaping. Damn. I never considered it. Shit. What is wrong with me if I forget these things? For some reason, this infuriated me. I slapped myself hard on the forehead. Probably too much because it burned like hell. Shauna placed me down, went into the kitchen, and returned immediately shaking her head. She rummaged through her large bag, pulling out a bottle of water. After removing the seal, she handed it to me. I wanted to refuse, not willing to accept anything from her. But then I realized I was quite hot and thirsty. So I drank the bottle, doing so with obvious anger. So, will you show me your apartment? She inquired as if she were visiting royalty. Just let's go around the kitchen, she said with apparent dissatisfaction. If it helps you leave faster, that's okay, I snapped. The unit was comfortable. At least that's how it seemed to me. 3 bedrooms. Mine, one serves as an office, and what I jokingly referred to as a guest room. There was never a single guest present, not even a trace of their appearance. The bathroom next to my bedroom was spacious, featuring a bathtub and a separate shower. The bathroom between the last 2 bedrooms only featured a shower. I had no idea if the taps worked, and the towels were undoubtedly already covered in dust. We ended up spending time on the big balcony, enjoying the fresh breeze. Shauna spent the entire walk speaking about trivial matters, complimenting the flowers in the pots and the paintings on the walls. She seemed to linger in each space, looking for anything to compliment. Strangely, her admiration extended to my bedroom, which reminded me of Glastonbury after the music event had ended, more than just a place to unwind. However, I saw that she appeared to be watching me. Okay, that's enough. When we returned to the living room, I spoke strongly. I was sweating, but I put it down to nervous stress from her presence. Will you leave now? Her eyes furrowed as she studied me intently. I wondered whether she was about to do something unpleasant because, like my doctor, she could get away with it. I couldn't understand why my cloudy mind, which was now normal, was even more confusing than before. Crap. The heat in the flat did not help. I checked the central heating thermostat, but the settings did not appear to have altered. I reduced the temperature a few degrees more. After 10 minutes of her unending stream of worthless conversation, I grew so overheated that I removed my sweatshirt, leaving me in a slightly stained, sleeveless tank top. I felt embarrassed to present myself to anyone in that manner. But it was better than nothing. Besides, I didn't invite her here, so she got whatever she deserved. I had a strong hunch that the vaccination was simply an excuse. Perhaps she left something behind when we broke up and has returned to retrieve it. Or it was about money. Tired of all this? I sank into a chair. Do you want money? I mumbled. I will not leave. That was not what I asked. I was not sure if I had stated it aloud. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't get my ideas together. I wiped the sweat from my brow and my hand went limp into my lap. Despite the fact that my eyes were burning again, I couldn't take my gaze away from her. Sweat ran down my face, almost like tears. In truth, Shauna's icy hand brushed my forehead. Fever. That is why I am still here, she whispered. Everyone's reaction varies, but this is a positive indicator. Your body vigorously combats the virus, boosting its temperature to eliminate the invader with heat. Come on, we need to get you into bed. She ducked under my arm, wrinkling her nose at the stench of old sweat, and reluctantly pulled me to my feet. It wasn't far from the living room to the bedroom, but the journey felt endless. Shauna remembered her current situation just as we were about to get into bed. Then she put me down in a chair and instructed me to concentrate on not falling to the floor. I tried to pay attention as she removed the bedding and fought to shift the mattress around. I imagine Mom located some clean linen someplace in the guest room, because the next thing I noticed were the soft pillows on the bed, which felt like the most comfortable thing I'd ever seen or smelled. However, by that point, I was curled up in a chair, trembling and quivering. "Mac," she called, approached me, crouched down, and touched my forehead again. Then, for some reason, she kept my hand until I realized she was taking my pulse. "How are you feeling?" she inquired quietly. "It's quite cold," I responded, struggling to keep my teeth from chattering for a brief while. This was true. I've never felt so cold in my life, and yet I was sweating. Nothing made sense anymore. Shauna drew me to my feet, removed my sweatpants and old tank top, and assisted me into bed, where I curled up again, still shaking. Finally, she wrapped me in a fresh sheet and blanket. "You'll feel better in a day," she whispered. "I will stay with you." My eyes closed, and the light went out in both the room and my head. I must have woken up occasionally. I remember moaning and complaining about how chilly I was, while she gently sponged, shaved, and cleaned my teeth. This only worked for a few minutes, and I fell asleep again. Another time, I was startled up by the sound of a vacuum. Perhaps it was the washing machine. I couldn't say for sure. I turned over and passed out again. When I eventually awoke, Shauna was sitting on the edge of the bed, softly shaking my shoulder. "You should eat," she replied. "Okay," I replied, yawning and stretching. I realized I was quite hungry. I threw off the blankets and attempted to get up, cursing the weakness that appeared to fully consume me. However, there will most likely be something in the kitchen. Food delivery has been around for a while. This isn't the first or last time I'll scrape mold from a piece of bread. The toaster will probably kill all of the spores. Maybe. No. Oh, no. You stay where you are. To my chagrin, she made me lie down again and persisted on giving me soup, thick soup with beef and vegetables as I lay down like a child or an invalid. Why are you doing this, Shauna? Why are you still around? You experienced a reaction to the vaccination, similar to what many others have. I was anticipating her and had an epinephrine syringe ready in case of an odd reaction. But you responded naturally, and I stayed to help you cope with it. Despite our hectic schedule, I can spare a few days to care for my old friend. So we're pals now. God, I hope we are at least buddies. I understand what I did was bad, but I still love you. There was a prolonged pause. Then Shauna proceeded. Her speech seemed forced and insincere. Well, at least I respect you enough to stay despite the foul odor in this location. It is amazing that the neighbors did not protest. What do they say when they come to see you? I frowned. I don't like having guests. I like the flat, but my neighbors are irritating. Her face showed a melancholy expression. So, Mac, am I the first one to arrive since you came here? No, absolutely not. It'd be dumb. The movers who had transported the furniture from the old flat were present. There are also groceries delivery persons. However, due to quarantine, packages are now being left at the door. Why the quarantine? Yes, that probably kept them out. While she was thinking about this, a few of small vertical wrinkles formed on her forehead, right above her nose. I recognized this expression. It was her professional medical appearance. "Speaking of groceries, I ordered another delivery," she added. "I cleaned out your refrigerator and threw everything out of the pantry." "So, what did you throw away?" "All of my food supplies. Your supplies were so outdated that they may have killed you instead of feeding you. However, they would have to contend with bacteria and mold on dirty dishes. Yes, I wash the dishes whenever I run out of clean ones." I responded with irritability. "So what? What difference does it make for you?" She pressed her hand to my jaw, her thumb gently stroking my cheek. It was such a familiar, kind gesture that tears welled up in my eyes again. Damn, I am so weary of my eyes continually running. "Mac," she spoke quietly, "how long have you lived like this?" "What do you mean? I mean, like this." She motioned around me and the entire flat. "You're so skinny that you can count your ribs." So I hugged you. In other conditions, I would not dare, based on what I noticed in the trash. "Can you eat largely black tea without sugar, cookies, and chips, and occasionally heat up some canned food? Previously, you were always well-groomed. You took a shower or bath every day, and I adored your scent. You've always disliked having stubble on your face. And when I saw you at the door, it appeared that you had started shaving a month ago. I gave up halfway and have not tried since. And the eyes? They're red and swollen. You often cry without realizing it. There are bags under my eyes that are large enough to hold a week's worth of vacation, let alone a family of 4. She paused when she saw the frown on my face. She was clearly attempting to joke, yet her voice had a hint of sorrow. "I apologize," she whispered. Shauna had been feeding me all while. Then she abruptly threw the spoon into the plate and walked out the door. She didn't even finish the statement because there was no reason to. The sobs in her voice were clearly audible. This really irritated me. I reached for a spoon but accidentally touched the ball, spilling its contents on the floor, so I just laid over and fell back asleep. The next time I awoke, I was alone. Perhaps Shauna had returned home, wherever that was. I never got around to finding out while resting on my back and staring at the ceiling. I tried to sift through my emotions about this. On the one hand, her presence seemed like a breath of fresh air in my life, and I could smell the beautifully folded and laundered clothes she had placed on the dresser. A clean, fresh scent. Of course, the disadvantage was that the contrast with how it smelled before became all too clear. On the other side, the inner monster, born of the fury and sadness that I had worked so hard to repress during her betrayal and subsequent divorce, was once again attempting to take control. I had struggled for so long to push it back and repress it, but now it was about to erupt again. I sat down, waited for the tiny wave of dizziness to pass, and then stood up, astonished to discover that I felt rather well. Shauna must have cleaned up the soup spill so I won't be dirty wandering around the flat. It was a modest positive, but I learned to cherish those moments when they arrived. I put on clean underwear, went to the restroom, and marveled at my freshly shaven face. But the visage in the mirror reminded me of photos of detainees from concentration camps during World War II. Shauna was accurate in her description. I walked onto the scale. 30 pounds of weight went without a trace. The kitchen appeared to be empty, with no stacks of dirty dishes anywhere. Even the dishwasher was emptied. However, the refrigerator and pantry were full. Vegetables and fruits were definitely the day's central topic. Sitting on the living room sofa, I determined that I would employ a cleaning once a week starting now. The difference between what I vaguely remembered and what I saw now was enormous. Then something clicked in my thoughts, and I walked to the office to check on my stock transactions throughout my absence. Of course, the markets failed me. I was planning a careful trade. However, while I was sleeping, the market went awry, and I lost prospective earnings. Now I'll have to keep the stock until it hits the stop-loss level or begins to rise again. This meant I wouldn't have enough money for subsequent purchases, and I couldn't stand it. The closest thing turned out to be a keyboard, which I began to smash on the table's edge while cursing. The desk was metal, the keyboard was plastic, and the keyboard lost this fight. Shards of plastic flew everywhere. I opened the cupboard, put the keyboard's remains into a large cardboard box, and removed a new one from its package. I had purchased a dozen and now had 6 left. After connecting the new keyboard, I quickly bought another batch. I turned to fetch a can of Red Bull and sat down to attempt to limit the damage when I noticed Shauna in the doorway. She stood and stared at me with wide eyes. "What?" I asked defensively. She peeked into the box containing the remaining keyboards. I had no idea how many of them were present, but the expression on her face indicated that she thought there were too many. Shauna took my hand and brought me back into the main room. I considered resisting, but realized it would be a meaningless display of fury. If she hasn't spotted it already, she never will again. She still grasped my hand, sat down beside me, and gazed at me, seriously. "Mac, you've got a problem, I understand." She sits next to me. "It's worse than you imagine. You're clinically depressed." "Nonsense. This is correct. You have fits of fury. You've fully isolated yourself and are obviously eating terribly. Your sleep is restless, disrupted, and like." "I don't know why," I said cynically. "I understand why." "Of course I do. I wrecked everything. Do you think I don't worry about this on a daily basis?" I had nothing to respond without using too many foul words. So I stayed silent. "I know why," she said. "But knowing the cause doesn't address the problem. Look at you. You get irritated at your neighbors over little matters. You become even more irritated with yourself about little matters. These are all symptoms of depression." She grasped my hand. "When was the last time you felt joyful about something?" I remained silent for a time, trying to figure out if she was expecting an answer from me. I felt incredibly slow the entire time. These awful clouds in my head wouldn't clear. But I attempted to consider her question. "I do not know. I eventually admitted I needed to question you about sex, not as your ex-wife, but as a physician. When is the last time you had sex?" I stared at her, feeling my fury build again. She winced, and I realized I'd squeezed her hand too hard. "Do you dare to ask? Do you dare to ask?" I started, but she interrupted me. "I need to know this, not for you, but to better understand your symptoms. Please do not resist, Mac. I want you to be healthy again, and you aren't. Okay? I did not have sex. Since you decided you needed more than I could provide, you abandoned me and proceeded to cheat, deceive, and lie. I did not have any sex, if that is what you mean." "How about you?" I gloated, observing the misery on her face. She said, "I haven't touched anyone except patients since then." "You are not the only person who has suffered depression. I believe it started shortly after I moved in with Jill. The patients perished one after another. I understood that despair creeps in unnoticed. It alters your mind in ways you can only see in retrospect. I am delighted you discovered a creative solution to cope with this," I snapped. "I did not have such an opportunity. I didn't have time for sex whenever I wanted. Of course, I spent no time with the woman I loved and married. You are luckier." She tried to remain composed, but I could tell she was struggling. "No, I do not agree. Loving you has been the most rewarding experience of my life," she added, her voice wavering. "Whatever happened to them? It was ordinary, mechanical. There was no love or emotions. Everything seemed unreal. Just a chance to take a short vacation from what was going on around us. With the help of what was going on inside," I answered, nodding to her hips. She raised her hand to cover her face and began to cry softly, but her hand clutching mine did not release its grip. "You can't punish me any more than I am punishing myself." She finally spoke, having controlled her emotions. "I lost just as much as you. I lost my love, husband, home, and life, all for a few minutes' relief. You think I don't realize how ridiculous this was? Do you believe I do not regret my actions? Every waking second and every night I fantasize about how happy we are together. These are vivid, golden dreams. And suddenly I awoke. Everything in my life is gray and dreary. But having sex on the side wasn't the worst thing I did, she explained. The hardest part is that I destroyed the person I loved. To me, you were nearly perfect, and I broke you for no reason. I am a doctor, and I should have known that my acts were not just self-destructive, but also indicators of the illness. I failed as a wife, a woman, and a physician. I've always believed myself to be good, moral, and sensible. But, as you clearly pointed out, I was completely wrong in all of these assessments. My actions were not only unethical, but also harmful and extremely dumb. I was essentially a foolish kid in the adult world who went around damaging things and harming people for the sake of destruction. She was correct. I couldn't punish her any more than she'd punished herself. Please allow me to try to help you get back on your feet. Please allow me to atone, even if only somewhat. I thought about it. It didn't seem like much of a favor, so I shrugged. Fine. Shauna suddenly brightened up. Her face lit up with relief. Thank you, God. Now I have to ask you another question about sex. Believe me, this is entirely for medical purposes, not out of curiosity or depravity. Go ahead, I said, rolling my eyes. How often did you experience self-satisfaction? She inquired quietly. I shrugged again. I do not know. Often. Sometimes. Occasionally. Or infrequently. I shake my head. Her eyes expanded. Okay. So when was the last time you did this? I tried to recollect what happened approximately a month before the pandemic began. Both you and I were working at the time. Her eyes grew even larger. It was more than a year ago, she whispered. I guess that last weekend with you, before you moved in with Jill, really exhausted me, I responded, attempting to be snarky. She did not enjoy the joke. Her face twisted with pain. How did you possibly maintain your sanity? However, the answer is no. Forget it. I am going to prescribe you an antidepressant, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. I detected a shadow of disappointment on her face as a result of my utter misunderstanding. Flew in, my face remained as blank. Prozac, she explained. I assumed it was a panacea for bored housewives. Housewives might also suffer from depression. I shrugged again. This appears to be the universal response for me lately. She hastily scrawled something on a notepad she had taken out of her briefcase. Okay. The sooner you start taking this, the sooner the meds will begin to function and possibly help you return to normal. She got to her feet and grabbed up her purse. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be back. No! I yelled, leaping to my feet, and wrath overtook me. Would you like 5 minutes? After you denied me this very thing, I will not give you 5 minutes or anything. Get out! Get out! Shauna appears to have realized she had wandered into the most forbidden location. She trembled, but remained firm in front of me. She said, I need to explain something about what happened the last time we spoke online. No, I don't want to hear any more lies. She persisted despite my words. The first time I spoke with you, Reg was present. I believe he was overly relaxed about what was going on between us. I didn't invite him, and I didn't want him present while we were conversing. It appeared while I was already connected to you. It was too late to kick him out without first acknowledging his presence. So I let him stay. But he listened to my real-life experiences. My life is with you. So I concluded the chat. I felt humiliated. I was already ashamed for sleeping with him. However, it was like a waking dream, like fog on a lake. It was not real. You were my reality. And he penetrated it, preventing me from continuing. Then you're even more of an idiot than I suspected. He did it on purpose, although he stayed out of sight. He made it apparent to both me and you that he had won the battle. I was not authorized to take part in this fight. He asserted that he would not do that. She fell silent, and it eventually dawned on her. This scumbag, this selfish jerk. And around 5 minutes. You have almost a year to come up with this justification, and the excuse is fairly pathetic. It is true. Damn it. So what's the difference, according to you? Simply go away. No, you require medical attention, and I am going to deliver it. Go back to bed. Vaccination nearly knocked you off your feet. Go. She began chasing me into the bedroom, waving her arms, which seemed to trigger something in me. I had an almost uncontrollable want to hit her. She noticed it in my eyes and took a half step back, but Shauna was adamant. I'll order antidepressants from the pharmacist. I am staying here. Please go to bed, Mac. You definitely need to relax. I grimaced. The back pain that began 6 months ago, most likely as a result of sitting in front of computer screens for extended periods of time, has abruptly worsened. I rubbed that area, but as always, it proved to be out of reach. It was unfair. If I were a woman, I could reach there with one or both hands. Women start to do this with bras as early as their teenage years. What is wrong with your back? She asked. Sometimes it aches. She lowered her shoulders slightly. Maybe this is another sign of depression. Your mind forces your body to find reasons not to improve. Perhaps I'll need to prescribe a stronger antidepressant. No, it is too early. Recovery will take time based on how you ate. She kept muttering to herself as I moved towards the bedroom. Then, unexpectedly, I glanced into the guest room and discovered a suitcase on the closet and some makeup and night creams on the nightstand. I instantly wanted to smell the cream and feel a sense of nostalgia, but instead, I shut the door on my memories and climbed into bed. This is how things went for the next several days. I made minimal contact, which she made up for with maximum contact. Eventually, the pills arrived, and she established a new pattern of dispensing one at a specific time of day. I don't think Shauna noticed, but the monster was not going away, and her presence simply exacerbated the situation. He frequently awoke inside me, and I began to drink a bottle of whiskey to attempt to calm down in addition to the tablets. This worked for a time, but a random gesture, look on her face, or simply a single phrase enraged the monster anew. 2 weeks after she moved in with me, the issue became more serious. Despite taking leave, she needed to return to the hospital for an urgent problem, some document or something similar. Reason informed me this was probably true, but the monster disagreed. I'm seeing her going to jail for threesomes, if not more. Why limit yourself to 3 when everyone in the hospital wants to join? I began crying again. All of this time and work spent trying to get rid of these memories, and even worse, the horrible images that my imagination produced, was for nothing. I rarely drink beer, and a pint is about my maximum. I had purchased the whiskey with the vague intention of treating guests, but loneliness had thrown that plan out the window. And now, this leader of Johnny Walker's finest was waiting for me. The little sips I'd taken so far hadn't significantly lowered the level in the bottle, so there was plenty remaining to try and binge. When Shauna returned, the monster had already gained possession. She opened the door with her key and put up her coat before I attacked her. I grabbed her violently, yanking and shoving her into the bedroom. If you can sleep with others, you can also sleep with me, I wheezed. I only hope your friends haven't worn you out. Shauna was too surprised to respond. Mac, no! She finally shrieked as I unbuckled my belt, revealing my true intentions. Do not do this, I ask you, Shauna. You owe me, and I will repay this debt. By that point, my remarks had lost touch with reality. Mac, you've gotten intoxicated. I can smell it. I told you not to drink while on the medications. It is not you. Please let me leave. You can sleep with other people, but not with me. Bullshit. I spoke in falsetto. Oh, I am sorry I slept with others. I am sorry, Mac, but I cannot sleep with you. You are just a loser, Mac. I noticed drops of my saliva on her cheek. You're a dreadful, evil, vile creature. Stop it. David, I am serious. Stop it. My error was to look her in the eye. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she gazed at me in despair, still attempting to push me away. It's not like that, Mac, Shauna said, her voice quivering with tears. Not like that. Not out of hate. I love you. I am not sure what else would have affected me, but the beast was in command, and Shauna was correct. The beast despised her. I resented her for not loving me enough, for betraying her promises, and for making me feel useless. Oh, the beast despised her so much. But I still loved her. A vast ocean of shame suddenly washed over me. I couldn't stand to look at her. I needed to hide. I walked away, stunned by what I had almost done. My feeling of self-worth was totally ruined. I was seated in the living room when she entered with a luggage in her hands. I think it's best if I go now. I nodded, knowing I was the most insignificant thing that could exist. I have never tried to force myself on a woman before. Can you handle it on your own? She asked. I nodded again. I left the medicines in the kitchen. Make sure you take them on time. I didn't have the strength to nod again. You should eat properly and sleep on a regular timetable. Otherwise, just leave, I interjected. I could stop by occasionally to check. No, Mac, do not come back. I'm not sure what more to say. Then stop talking. Leave silently. Simply go away. Her free hand flailed aimlessly in the air for a moment before she turned and went away. The sound of the door closing seemed like a death knell for the globe. All of the nasty, ugly, desperate ideas I had been fighting with came flooding back. I was no longer just a sorry guy. I was also on the verge of becoming a criminal. I apologize, I whispered into the void. I'm not sure how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, and days. When I looked back, it was already dark outside. I've always been drawn to the darkness. You did not have to witness the dreadful dullness of your life. Your head became more clearer. I went to the computer, examined many websites, and donated to organizations. I considered leaving a note, but chose not to. Then I took some food and water, swallowed them, and lay down on the sofa in my darkness. The saving, embracing darkness. After some while, I heard screams in the distance. Those awful neighbors must be creating more noise with their antics, and then I fell asleep. Finally, pain-free. I had a dream about a girl in a tower guarded by a dragon. I tried to get inside and save her, but the dragon smacked me with its tail and hurled me away. Green devils sat on my chest, bound me up, and dragged me off in a chariot. Then, angels in white appeared. They drove away the creatures and began pulling the chariot with their bare hands, like slaves building the pyramids. I felt the cold sweat on my skin, which was drying with relief, until I noticed that the winged woman next to me had no arms, only lengthy tentacles. She placed one of them in my mouth, and it began to lengthen. She stroked my chest before striking it harder and harder till the egg exploded and the creature from the movie Alien emerged. I awoke to the sound of my voice cracking with panic in the dark. I was no longer in my flat, but rather in a curtained area of some enormous space. There was a drop somewhere close. Transparent droplets from two different bags streamed down thin tubes and into a needle on the back of my hand. There was a monitor on the other side. I recognized the line on the screen from the movies, but it didn't seem particularly interesting. I closed my eyes and attempted to assess the condition of my physique. My throat stung and was so dry that the Sahara resembled a lovely green meadow. The tongue felt bloated and scratchy, with a nasty vomit-like taste. There didn't appear to be a hole in my chest. Therefore, the monster from the dream wasn't hidden under the bed after all, and was unlikely to be hiding among the springs. I attempted to rub my face, but for some reason my hands would not move. After a few seconds, I noticed they were corrected. The monitor started beeping furiously as I pulled my arms and twisted my body from side to side, attempting to free myself. There were fast steps and a nurse approached me. She swiftly checked all of the tubes and wires that connected me to the electricity system, while I tried unsuccessfully to ask a question. Wheezing from a dry throat, she placed her hand on my chest when she had finished the examination. "Do not try to talk," she said gently, as opposed to my terrified state. Her speech did not convey any consolation. "We had to pump your stomach, and your throat often hurts afterward. Your vocal cords might be harmed. Why? I struggled to speak in a voice that resembled Darth Vader's creaking and muttering. Frustrated, I desperately jerked my hands in my chains. "Don't worry," she said. "This is routine process to ensure your safety. Patients may need to be detained at times so that we can assist them without risking their own safety." "Okay, you get the concept. Fortunately, your wife discovered you in time and administered CPR." She looked to the corner of the room. I followed her sight and noticed Shauna there. She cuddled up on the chair, snoring quietly. I hadn't noticed her before. "She's a doctor," I said. "Oh, I am sure you will be okay. Wake her up. Should I say you've come to your senses?" She was quite worried. I shake my head. My attempt to free myself from anguish and guilt failed. Instead, my darkest dread ensured that I stayed in this world and continued to suffer. "How long has it been?" I whispered my question. She leaned in to hear. She had the scent of new soap, shampoo, and a little perfume. "From the moment you were taken to the hospital." She responded consistently over the course of 2 days. "Now relax. I'll tell the doctor you're awake." About half an hour later, a young Asian man dressed in a white robe entered the room. He took my card and, without looking at me, asked, "Are you David McLean? Could you please tell me your date of birth and address?" I barely heard the correct information. "How are you feeling?" I nodded. Okay," he replied instinctively, still not raising his gaze. "Do you remember what occurred?" The question appeared ludicrous. I knew exactly how my cocktail ended, but he nodded again, compelling him to look at me. Based on the notes, I am confident in the answer, but I will still pose the question. "Were you aware of the repercussions of what you did?" "Yes," I responded unwillingly. My failure made the entire undertaking appear weak and childish. A meaningless, dumb protest against the universe. It seems to me that the physicians and medical personnel were fed up with people like me taking up their time, which might be better spent dealing with actual accidents and diseases. Yes, I was certain that's what they believed. A loud gasp echoed from the corner of the room. I tilted my head to meet Shauna's stare. She appeared weary, haggard, aged. A new surge of guilt overtook me for depriving her of her beauty. "When you arrived at the emergency department, you required assistance with breathing." The doctor continued without acknowledging our discreet exchange of eyes. "Your heart stopped on its route to the ambulance. Dr. McLeod was with you." He paused, turned over many pages of the card, and asked Shauna a question. "Are you his wife and doctor?" "Yes," she responded briefly. Even her voice sounded gloomy. "Then did you sign?" "Yes." He mumbled, "This raises some doubts." "It's what it is," Shauna replied with a tired sigh. A soft beep came from the doctor's pocket. He took out the device, glanced at it briefly, and addressed Shauna as if I was not present. "They are phoning me. Could you explain to him the next steps in his treatment?" She nodded quietly and received the card from him. "Thank you." He went without even glancing at me. Shauna approached the bed and stood next to me, peering down. Her bright, puffy eyes mimicked mine. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of gloating that she looked as horrible as I did, but it swiftly faded into great melancholy. She has always been the benchmark of beauty for me, and few women can compete with her. I didn't want my recollections of her to be marred by fatigue and exhaustion. She caught something in my eyes and swiftly averted them, focusing on the pitcher of water on the nightstand next to my bed. She poured some water into a glass and guided me through a few swallows. The icy liquid turned out to be the sweetest nectar, despite my throat's stinging protests with each drink. Shauna began to discuss what had happened since the ambulance came, per the doctor's instruction. I recognized that my dream was a bizarre, warped version of actual events, from the paramedics' green uniforms to the angels in white who inserted the probe into me. "Have you found me?" I asked in a raspy tone. She nodded and proceeded. I neglected to leave the key and returned to give it back. She remained silent for a moment before adding, "What you did may have affected your heart and kidneys, so they will closely monitor you for a few days and refer you for psychiatric treatment." I waited until she was finished before asking, "So you signed an order to tie me up like a violent psycho?" Her eyes gleamed, but she collected herself. "Yes, this is required, so that when patients regain consciousness, they do not attempt to injure themselves again." "Let me go, Shauna," I asked gently. "You understand that what happened yesterday was not me, or at least not who I was. I'm not sure who I am anymore, but you know how much I dislike the sense of being trapped in." She stayed silent for a long time, reflecting on my words. I endured the silence. Regardless of what she thought, the lunacy that drove the attempt to force her was not my true self. She knew it. She silently wrote a note on the card and began unfastening the bands around my wrist. "Mac," she whispered as I stroked my numb hands. "The day before yesterday, I would have cheerfully made love to you, putting my entire soul into it. I'm willing to do anything to get you back, but I won't tolerate it if you do it out of anger or malice." I stared at her. "I do not love you," I replied quietly. Her expression distorted for a single second, and I could see the sorrow she felt after hearing this obvious falsehood. This made me even more depressed. She remained there for several days, smiling with agony in her eyes. Each time I stared into those eyes, I felt terrible. They believed that love should make you happy, lighthearted, and in the mood for spring. But my affection for her simply led to terrible depression. The psychiatrist came to visit me and took Shauna into his office for a talk. He later returned to get my point of view, sat close to the bed and said almost nothing, only asked questions so that I could relate the complete tale of my life over the last few years. It's odd, but he never inquired how I was feeling. I assumed this was a mandatory inquiry for any self-respecting therapist. However, he did prescribe me new meds. After a week in the hospital and numerous rigorous sessions, he looked relieved that I was unlikely to attempt suicide again and offered to sign a release form the next day, with the caveat that I attend the final appointment in his office before that to negotiate a treatment plan. It was a bit odd. I'm used to doctors issuing orders like they were photographers or wedding planners. As a result, the request, rather than the order, was pleasantly unusual. Another surprise was Shauna's appearance when I went to meet him late in the evening. She hadn't returned in a few days or moved back into my flat, I thought, and I resolved not to see her again. But here she was in a sky-blue summer dress, her hair and makeup nicely groomed, as if she were going for a stroll through the park. She was seated in one of 3 chairs in the psychiatrist's office. I grimaced, sat in the last chair, and turned away. "I brought the car so you could go home," she explained calmly. I didn't respond. "Mrs. McLean is still officially your doctor." "Doctor?" Raines explained quietly, as I attempted to ignore her, staring at the credentials and certificates on his wall. "It will also benefit your treatment if she understands all of the details. However, you can also choose not to have it present." "Mr. Raines, why do your certifications state you're a doctor?" I inquired, hoping to buy time to consider his comments. "My mother is from rural Africa," he said. She hoped that such a moniker would help me move up the social ladder among my peers. It was standard practice at the time to give children names like patience, virtue, knowledge, or even teacher as a symbol of their future success. I looked at him closely and realized for the first time that he was of mixed heritage. He was quite old, and his short, clipped hair was fully gray. Before that, I mistook him for a man with a nice tan. "It didn't work," he said with a sarcastic smirk. "With the exception of a few pals, the majority of my classmates believed I was a nerd with an unusual name and invented nicknames to avoid addressing me Mister. My mother had noble intentions, but after earning my medical degree, I started using my middle name, Eric, in honor of my father." I nodded. It made complete sense. It also increased the level of interest. "Sean can remain," I said. It could not get much worse than it was. So why create a scene? Okay, should we start, Mr. McCreath? Mac, I interrupted him. Just Mac. He nodded thoughtfully before starting again. Mac, to put it simply, you had schizoaffective disease. You are profoundly depressed. That is something you already know. I have altered your medicine, and you should be able to think more clearly now that I have reviewed your medical records and what you have told me in the last several days. This is not a chronic condition, which I define as one that lasts a lifetime. You do not have an inherited chemical imbalance or recurrent seizures. You underwent significant stress and simply reacted by withdrawing within yourself. The root of your sadness is plain and understood, and I believe in normal times you would have been identified and treated long before things got this far. Unfortunately, the pandemic has touched everyone. We are a sociable animal, and forced seclusion has resulted in more mental illnesses than you could imagine. He grinned sadly. I believe practically every psychiatrist today seeks treatment from colleagues, so while we understand the process, we are not immune to it. I'm going to offer a few steps to help you get out of this situation. Depression is something you must recognize, admit, and actively work to overcome. Medication will assist, but you must work on it yourself. It won't be something big or amazing unless you want it to be. Some patients benefit from extreme sports like skydiving or mountain riding. The adrenaline rush serves as an effective remedy. It makes you feel alive. But in your situation, I'm talking about simple things like getting outside, doing something, and engaging with others, playing sports. Practice anything from badminton to cage fighting. It does not matter. Make a plan for each following day. Stability and structure will aid you in overcoming this situation. I nodded. I knew what he was talking about. That enticing feeling of letting life take its course rather than attempting to direct it. We have previously explored why you attacked your wife. I believe that adjusting your meds will help you control your reactions and deal with them. We'll go over this more in future meetings. How do you feel about everything that has been said? He asked. I paused for a long time, looking at the pile of carpet. I hate this, I hissed. I despise it with all my heart. Me? Shauna asked in fear, abruptly breaking the silence. She listened silently the whole time, occasionally nodding in accord with his interpretation. Do you really dislike me? Not really. Damn it. I despise this entire situation. I hate that you left. I hate that you cheated on me. I detest that I found out about it and was unable to forgive or forget. I detest how horrible I feel when I think about you. All of this hatred is boiling inside me, and I'm not sure how to get rid of it. Most of the time, I try to avoid thinking about it. I spend my days analyzing stocks on the computer to pass the time and avoid thinking about you. I turned to face her. You broke me. You threw away my affection for you in the process. You broke something in me, and now I'm worried I'll never be happy again. That makes me sick. My eyes began to water again. Looking at the ventilation on the wall behind the doctor, I concluded that it was most likely caused by the air conditioner. Then I remembered that I don't have air conditioning at home, only good old radiators. This indicates that the idea is untenable. Most importantly, I concluded in barely a whisper, I hate how I can't quit missing you, if I wanted to hurt her. Then, with that final hit, I would have won the world championship. Shauna had a full breakdown. Her body shook from sobbing. She breathed deeply and let forth sounds of sorrow, grief, and pain, as if she were lamenting the dead. I wasn't sure what to do. I felt sorry that my revelation had caused her so much anguish, regardless of what transpired between us. But I didn't know what to do. However, Mr. Raines refused to budge, so I decided to follow his lead. A minute later, he spoke again, allowing her time to gather herself. Mac, you are severely depressed. As I previously stated, you suffered from schizoaffective disease, which eventually led to your suicide attempt, and this is not to be taken lightly. But I believe you are on the road to recovery, and I doubt you will want to try again. That is why I would prefer to release you from the hospital and send you home with medical care given." I nodded, continuing to stare at the carpet that I had attempted to dye but failed, and now felt immense embarrassment for doing something so idiotic. My death would not change anything for myself or anyone else. Shauna created the problem and then rescued me from having to solve it. It was a conundrum, and I didn't know how to handle it. Rains emphasized that this care must be permanent. But honestly, you are not my primary priority right now. Your wife is quite ill. I stared at him. Shauna has an issue. Shauna attempted to stand up, her lips open in protest, but the psychiatrist's severe expression drove her back into her chair. He turned to face her. "Mrs. McLean. Or do you like Dr. McLean? Whichever is most convenient for you. Based on what you've said, I believe you experienced a psychotic episode that lasted more than 6 weeks after leaving home. You stated multiple times that your chats with your ex-husband and your work at the hospital were genuine, and everything else was a dream. This denotes a departure from reality. Furthermore, we discussed how you simply followed your roommate's suggestions and requests, making few or no decisions of your own while away from work, combined with the post-traumatic stress disorder from which you suffer, which has unfortunately become common among healthcare workers at all levels over the past year. This psychotic episode is of great worry. He was going through the files on the table, and I sensed he had something unpleasant for Shauna that he was subconsciously delaying. Finally, he raised his eyes to gaze at her again. "I phoned the administration of your hospital, explained the circumstances, and informed you that I had granted you sick leave indefinitely." She stood up sharply. Full of outrage. "You have no rights. I have patients who depend on me. Mrs. McLean, if your health has impaired your ability to make decisions in the last week, you have stolen medical supplies from a hospital with good intentions, but I did it for Mac. He needed a vaccination. Mac was entirely isolated prior to your visit. He was one of the most protected individuals, at least from the epidemic. Furthermore, you had no jurisdiction to force him to get vaccinated." "Perhaps," she responded, determined not to give in. "Perhaps I made a mistake in trying to ensure Mac's security. Nonetheless, this has no bearing on my professional abilities. Mrs. McLean, you cannot remove me from my job at the hospital. Your attempt to treat your ex-husband was ineffective. The drugs you prescribed merely worsened his depression. Medicines are pointless unless they are used to treat anything. They're a tool, not a cure. In addition, these medications are not appropriate for his condition. They are effective for anxiety, but are not appropriate for addressing what your ex-husband went through. All of this throws into doubt your ability as a doctor." He spread his arms and pointed at his office. "You cannot practice medicine in this state. I apologize, but this is a fact. If you were healthy, you would be the first to acknowledge it. However, you are currently unable to provide safe patient care." Shauna looked at him as if she was about to argue. But then her shoulders sank and she hid her face with her hands. My heart sunk with anguish for her. She appeared destroyed in every way. A year ago, I would have celebrated such karmic restitution. Now I couldn't take her pathetic appearance. Why does the psychiatrist who is supposed to help her continue to harm her? "Enough," I remarked, standing up and approaching her. "Enough. There was nothing terrible about her acts. If everything you've said is correct, her actions were caused by illness. If I had known she was sick, I would not have filed for divorce. I would never let her leave home." I felt a little icy hand. "Take mine with care." I looked down and met her gaze with cautious gratitude. It almost ripped me apart. I was overwhelmed with remorse, sadness, and compassion. I turned to the reins. "This is incorrect. What type of treatment is this? You appear more like a dictator than a doctor. Your wife isn't my patient, Mac. You're my patient." I opened my lips to respond, but was unable to come up with anything. Instead, I clutched Shauna's hand tighter, attempting to find the perfect words. "Didn't you pledge you'd do no harm?" I said this while glancing at him. This is correct, but the oath applies exclusively to the doctor and his patient. Should I not harm those who have harmed me? This is logical. It could be worthwhile to ask your wife about this pledge. Has she not wounded you via her acts and lousy treatment? Shauna screamed softly and attempted to pull her hand away from mine, but I held her close. She is unwell. Damn it. You stated it yourself. We are leaving. That is enough. Raines smiled. One more minute, please, he said, passing me several small pieces of paper. These are the recipes for you and your wife. He proceeded. I unwillingly accepted them, gazing quickly at the titles of the 3 different medications given for each of us. Nothing familiar. Shauna will need to be looked after, right? So should you. Raines continued, leaning forward as if to tell me something private. She could hear every word. Unfortunately, given the epidemic and the current system overload, we can only provide basic treatment. The nurse will spend little more than a few minutes checking your blood pressure and temperature. However, this will not be enough to bring you both into balance. He scratched his chin, making me think of a man with an imaginary beard. However, I see one method that could be great for your circumstance. I stared at him and waited for an explanation. When he sat there silently, I raised my free hand and made an expressive face, indicating my displeasure. He nodded as if he were waking up, then handed me a stack of documents from the cupboard beside his desk. You will have to look after each other. Here are the specifics of the care that each of you requires. He spoke quicker, sensing that I was about to object. Shauna requires support. The drugs I gave for her could cause some disorientation and distraction. She will need continuous reminders to take her prescriptions on schedule and not make dose errors. These medications are not simple solutions that can be purchased at the drugstore without a prescription. At the same time, you need something to give your life meaning, he explained. A task that you can manage, something that will take your mind off of bad feelings and allow you to concentrate on solving the problem. But I can't be with her, I objected. It is not safe. Do you fear you'll hurt her again? He asked gently. I considered his comments, then winced and shook my head. No, I do not think so. What occurred was a bizarre, singular situation. I usually don't drink much. Shauna, you should pay more attention to your hubby. He's not in good health, and I'm sure you don't want him in the hospital again for whatever reason. Am I correct? She shook her head, her hair faintly brushing against her cheeks. This move reminded me of how much I like kissing her hair, feeling it against my lips, and inhaling its aroma. I attempted to suppress these ideas, but they persisted, as they usually did. I discovered another unusual thing. Raines ceased addressing ex-husband and ex-wife and started calling them husband and wife, referring to her as Shauna rather than Mrs. McLean. His forceful voice stopped my thoughts. I've planned a joint consultation with both of you for early next week. If you have an emergency that demands my attention, please leave a message with my secretary. Here's my business card. I took it and placed it in my pocket. Turning towards the exit, I will wait for you in the car. I told her I needed to ask Dr. Raines one final question. She nodded and exited the office. How much of what you mentioned is true? I asked harshly. How much of this is just psychobabble to explain poor behavior? He snorted, not laughing, but with a sarcastic recognition of my disbelief. This is entirely true. Consider investing everything you have into helping a patient. He appears to be on the mend, and you feel like you won. You've finished your work. You have demonstrated your worth as a doctor. The patient dies for no obvious reason. As a result, it consistently breaks even the most tough. Imagine this happening every day for months. This is pushing healthcare personnel to the brink. He remained silent for a time before adding, and yes, people do some pretty damn weird things when they're on edge. Do not quote me on this. I refute everything. Granny is 2 syllables, I mumbled, hardly suppressing a chuckle. Right. However, in our profession, calling someone crazy is considered impolite. I snorted in answer. He truly had a sense of humor. You set it all up, I said. You devised this plan with the intention of ensuring our mutual well-being. Why? He pursed his lips and thought for a time. He said, I don't understand what you're talking about. But first, let's establish how aware you are of PTSD. This rapid change perplexed me. Not very excellent. I always assumed it was largely about troops. However, I understand that this is not just their concern, especially if doctors are affected as well. People think of the military, and that is correct. But that is only the top of the iceberg. Anyone can get PTSD. All it takes is one injury. Anyone can get PTSD. The rains continued. Constant stress can also contribute to this, especially if it is not relieved. For example, despite doctors' best efforts, patients die one after the other. New patients are already awaiting hospitalization. So, every day for months, healthcare workers who have experienced this must return home and quickly resume their typical family routine. While struggling with the worry of infecting their loved ones, he took a close look at me. Furthermore, patients with PTSD frequently experience intense emotions of guilt or shame, whether logical or not. According to some estimates, this illness affects about 1/3 of all hospital personnel. But most importantly for you, Shauna is exhibiting several signs that I have uncovered. Inability to make correct decisions, detachment from others, sleep disorders, and of course the same sense of guilt that I mentioned. I felt uneasy. I assumed Shauna felt awful because she cheated on a colleague. Yes. However, when this emotion is paired with additional symptoms and possibly survivor guilt, it becomes excruciating to her psyche. Even the most resilient people succumb in such circumstances. All this indicates that Shauna requires assistance, and I'm afraid you're the one who should help her now. You mentioned that her parents are in a nursing home, and her brother resides in Australia with his family. So who? Is it not you? Of course. If you are unable to be with her, she will need to be hospitalized or placed in a specialist facility while taking the medications I prescribed. He stared at me. So how much do you detest your ex-wife? Enough to thrust her into the clutches of an overburdened system that would attempt to assist her, but perhaps that would be insufficient. After seeing you two together, I don't think you dislike her. That much. You despise what she did, and that is entirely understandable. You stated you missed her, but I believe you still love her. He extended his hand and shook mine. I believe you're a wonderful person, Mac. I hope I am correct for both of your sakes. Come see me next week, and bring Shauna with you. I mumbled, It is not fair to make me feel guilty. No, this is not fair. But my responsibility is to ensure that you both regain your mental wellness. I'm betting this will help you establish mental balance, allowing you to make an informed decision about what you want out of the remainder of your life and whether or not to involve Shauna in it. She needs it as well. Now consider her other psychological issues. Feeling sorry for what she did to you would finally lead to her death. I mean it literally. He smiled, appearing much younger and under this final level of pressure. I wish you luck. Please keep me posted if anything changes. When I reached the parking lot, I searched around for my car and soon located it. The lone one with a beautiful blonde with brown eyes stood next to it, staring blankly ahead. I opened the door for her and she stepped inside the car. We removed our masks with relief and sat in silence for a bit before I started the car and drove out of the parking lot. She didn't ask where we were going, and I didn't explain either. What are your thoughts? I asked. I can't, she muttered. If I can't work, I'll spend the day sitting in my flat and turning into. She came to a stop in front of me. I finished for her. I did not mean it as an offense. I understand, and I didn't take it that way. I shrugged. This is correct. It just is. She sat silently for a time before looking around. Where are we going? To your home. You'll have to guide me. Shauna sighed deeply. I can't do this alone, she repeated. You will need to pack your clothing. I believe I will be around for a long time, so pick well. I offered her a neutral smile. Okay. She spoke after a pause and squeezed my hand. Thank you. As long as you feel safe, I said. I despise what I tried to do. Mac, I feel safe. You terrified me, but you managed to stop, even though I damaged your medication. That was my fault, and I got drunk. It is already on me. As a result, I will stop drinking and dispose of any remaining alcohol in the apartment. You must ensure that I only take the medications that Dr. Raines has recommended. I will do the same for you. So we'll be living in your flat. I gazed at her. I just want to be sure. She swiftly elaborated. I need clear and exact directions. I can't take hints and suggestions anymore. The decision to get vaccinated and come to you was the clearest notion in recent weeks, and it involved breaking the law. I suppose Dr. Raines is correct about me. Perhaps I should give up drugs completely. I am now useless to both people and animals. She began to cry quietly again, and the hopelessness in her voice moved me to reach out and hold her hand in compassion. Then I shifted gears and placed her hand on my thigh. She appeared to feel better about this brief encounter and left it there. When I spoke with Raines after you left, I began hesitantly. He explained that our loving for one other was fundamentally a frantic attempt to return to normalcy together. Do you believe this is achievable for the first time since the start of the situation? Her speech and expression conveyed hope. I don't believe it's impossible, I said, unwilling to offer false promises. Let us put it this way. We were going to live together in an apartment that, while not small, didn't provide much privacy, which would be challenging at times, even with the finest intentions in the world. You require clarification. So, here it is. I don't forget what happened a year ago, but I have forgiven you for it. I mean, if you were unwell, I don't blame you. Please don't tell me about your two housemates. I let grip of the steering wheel for a moment. This term is being displayed with quotation marks in the air. My stomach plummeted as I uttered that. She shook her head decisively. I will not. I promise. For a second, I wanted to criticize her for her ability to keep her commitments, but I resisted this emotion. It would not benefit any of us. So, what is the point? Maybe the new medicines actually worked. They were definitely superior to the one Shauna suggested for me. Thank you. So Shauna moved back into my flat, this time with a lot more clothes. So much so that, in good conscience, I offered her half of my closet, in addition to what was in the guest room. It was not easy. Sometimes I'd growl and unleash my verbal claws. Other times, she would sit alone and cry hopelessly. But as the hours, days, and weeks passed, I learned not to be bothered by the early disappointments. And she found that life is not an endless dullness, but rather contains minor joys that can be focused on. We eventually created a comfortable routine. I was the first to get up and make tea and breakfast. Then, as I bathed, Shauna cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed the dishes, and organized our medicines, waiting for me so we may double-check each other's pills before we take them. It seemed bizarre and unneeded at first, but over time such small acts became a habit, giving us a sense of security. After breakfast, I worked for exactly 3 hours, to the minute. Then we put on our masks and took a walk, following the trek. Lunch was cooked, and while I returned to work for a few hours, Shauna went out shopping for fresh groceries or whatever she required. Along the way, she stopped by the library to see if anything new had arrived. She still needed explicit instructions and was hesitant to choose books for me, calling each time to confirm if I wanted to read one or the other. At first, I was irritated by these daily calls, though I didn't show it. But then I realized she wasn't only asking for my preferences. She also wanted to show me where she was and reassure me. Shauna tried to tell me she was not seeing anybody else. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. We are divorced. We met by coincidence, but she made it clear that she wasn't searching for anyone on the side. This concept unexpectedly moved me, and I started looking forward to her phone calls. So when she didn't call one day, my mood swiftly deteriorated, reverting to the past. When she arrived home, I couldn't stop myself from lashing out at her. Luckily, I got through. She excitedly gave me a paper bag. Look, Stephen King's latest book has been released. I know how much you love them, so when I saw it in the library, I dashed to the bookstore and purchased it for your collection. Shauna looked overjoyed, almost leaping up and down like a small child. When she didn't call, I looked at the book to cope with my heightened emotions. I quickly plunged into my dark thoughts and became solitary. And all this time, I was silently upset at her. She got me a gift out of true want to do something kind. I could not stand it. Overwhelmed by the shame of my thoughts and the relief that they were wrong, I drew her close to me and hugged her hard, and he kissed her without thinking. It was just like our first kiss. I had a powerful emotional boost, like if a wave had risen within me. It wasn't a sexual feeling, just pure emotion. After a minute, I backed away, fearful that she would see this as the start of anything unpleasant. But she quickly drew my head back to her and continued the kiss, gripping me hard as if she was attempting to merge with me. At this time, I couldn't ignore the building sexual urge inside me. Somewhere in the background, I realized I was already too horny. Shauna's dark eyes were large and inquiring as she pulled away. "Would you like to love me?" she whispered. "It would make me very delighted." I simply nodded, unable to respond. I really wanted this, and a part of me wanted it much more than I knew. She took my hand and brought me into the bedroom. Regardless of everything I had done to her before, she still wanted me. I was astounded by the intensity of her emotions, which allowed her to overcome everything. She muttered, "I didn't have anyone," since I said farewell. It happened a long time ago. I answered absent-mindedly, not wishing to dwell on the past. This is not the time. We made love when I woke up. Shauna was sitting next to me, resting her hand on my chest, and smiled softly. She exclaimed one more time, "I want it again." I gently sat up, leaning forward to kiss her. "Greedy girl," I whispered, smiling. Her smile grew even bigger. "Did you like it?" she inquired quietly. "I feel like I'm going to fall asleep for a week with an unbreakable smile. I can be your princess, waking you awake with a kiss." She offered, laying down with her head on my chest. I said, "It's the wrong fairy tale." "What?" "This isn't Sleeping Beauty. This is Little Red Riding Hood." I didn't comprehend. "Tell me what size my teeth are." She was perplexed, but suddenly her face cleared, and she spoke in exaggerated horror. "Will you eat me all? Oh, you are such a nasty wolf." She lightly tapped my nose with her finger, and I snarled back, liking the experience. Her eyes widened with amazement. She suddenly let go of me and dropped to the floor. Shauna squealed and attempted to sneak past me, but I grabbed her arm, swung her around, and pulled her into the air. After a few steps, we arrived at the bed. She used her fist to playfully smack me in the chest. "Bad wolf. Please release me immediately." "Okay," I said, flinging her on the bed with a grin. She shouted in surprise but landed softly and began laughing as she tried to stand up. I pounced on top of her, bared my fangs, and pretended to bite her throat. She came out laughing like a child. When I was younger, I would pretend to bite our dog by growling at him. The dog rushed around in circles, barking with excitement. I mastered this game well, but as we grew older and matured, the dog and I were less wicked. So when I hissed at her neck, Shauna shrieked like a young kid. To be honest, I was somewhat surprised. The growl of a grown man sounded and felt very different from that of a 10-year-old youngster. "We made love again. I love you," I told her calmly and tenderly. She unexpectedly burst into tears. "Oh God, forgive me. I apologize for what I did to you. I love you. Always loved. And I believed you would never be able to forgive me, that you would loathe me forever. And now, I'm so sorry." Her sobbing overwhelmed me, so I began to calm her down by softly kissing her cheeks and saying words of love. And then we both laughed. The laughter was light and genuine, as if the darkness and weight that had lingered between us for so long had suddenly vanished. In a few weeks, Shauna and I returned to Dr. Rain's first weekly appointment, then every 2 weeks until the following visit. When we entered the office, I purposefully grabbed Shauna's hand, and she clutched it strongly as if she was terrified to let go. The doctor smiled at us, encouraged us to sit down, and then casually spoke with us while observing. He then looked at his notes, nodded, and stated, "The treatment appears to be working." I nodded in response. "It appears you made a breakthrough. Tell me about it." Shauna and I, little embarrassed, told him about how she bought me the book, my angry feelings, my remorse, and our reconciliation. Of course, we discussed the specifics of our intimacy and hints without providing exact details. But he knew everything. I couldn't resist asking how you knew your hazardous strategy would work. How did you decide that we should be made to care for one another? He fell silent for a moment, his expression solemn. Then he sighed and began speaking. "I got married once at a party. My wife consumed too much booze. I discovered her in the bedroom with a stranger." I nodded. Shauna, surprised by this news, listened intently with her eyes wide open. I was infuriated. I grabbed her hair and took her out of the room, then the home. I yelled at her the entire way. When we got home, I tossed her out, and the next morning I filed for divorce. She begged me to forgive her, stating that she was inebriated and had no idea what was going on. But I was adamant that I was a guy, and she became a nasty traitor to me. He paused, poured water from the carafe, and drank before proceeding. The doctor took a brief sip of water, as if to collect his thoughts, before continuing. "We got divorced. She attempted to delay the process, begged me to give her another opportunity. But I didn't listen to myself. She was a traitor, and I savored her misery. She felt strangely satisfied about how much she was suffering. I felt pleased of my steadfastness." He grinned. That grin, however, did not convey delight. This carried on for 17 months. She continued to write, call, and try to speak with me. However, all came to an end one day. Complete silence. And do you understand how I felt? Anxiety. I wondered whether something horrible had happened to her. Dr. Reynes paused to take another sip of water. Looking past us, I checked to make sure she was okay. He proceeded. I discovered that she was healthy, but she stopped running after me. She eventually let go and found someone else, someone to whom I gave all of my love, and I was left with emptiness. He grinned sadly. We crossed paths several times. She was nice and cordial, but there was no love in her eyes. She sacrificed everything she had until I broke her heart with my words and deeds. She married another man, found happiness, and I realized I'd lost everything. His fingers shook slightly as he poured himself more water. I still love her. I continuously think about her. But now, I'm unable to do anything. Everything I would wish to change is in the past. So I use my experience to help others. The doctor took a big breath and smiled at us, expressing both grief and concern. "Do you comprehend what I am saying?" he asked. "You had an opportunity that I was unwilling to take. You were both broken, but you had a spark that could be reignited. That is why I placed this gamble by combining you. I couldn't let you miss what I had missed." Shauna and I remained silent. On the way back, I was thinking about what he said, sitting close to Shauna. I pondered about what I had heard. How could someone who had been through such a difficult breakup find the strength to assist others rebuild their relationships? This question troubled me. But then I looked at Shauna. She sat next to me and smiled pleasantly. Her hand rested on mine. Perhaps the future was uncertain. We weren't sure if we could grow old together or return to the altar. But now we had a goal. To rebuild what had been destroyed, to replace lost innocence with experience and understanding. I'll do my best, I assured her. Shauna turned to face me. Her smile brightened. I agree. Mac. And at that moment, I knew that this is all we can ask of each other. We are both willing to try. And this was already a significant step forward. Since then, our lives have begun to stabilize. Obviously, not everything was ideal. We did have disagreements on occasion. Shauna was sometimes caught in her own thoughts and may sit alone for hours. I was irritated by little matters at times, but I tried to keep it to myself. We learned to be tolerant. We taught each other how to cope with our surroundings. We worked together to progressively repair the destroyed areas of our planet. Over time, our rituals grew stronger. Breakfast became more than just an obligation, but a comforting, even religious experience. We continued to check each other's meds, which helped us stay on track. Our walks grew longer, and we occasionally discovered private spots in the park to sit in silence or converse. Shauna started to find herself again. She started reading more, not just professional literature, but also fiction books, which she had previously ignored. She would sometimes read portions to me aloud, and I remember thinking that her voice offered me comfort. We began discussing the future. For the time being, proceed with caution and avoid forming long-term plans, but continue to communicate. Shauna abruptly came to a halt while we were heading down an alley in the park. "Do you still see me as the woman who deceived you?" she questioned, gazing directly into my eyes. Her question struck me by surprise. I didn't respond immediately away, unsure how to convey myself adequately. Should I think about it? Yes, occasionally. But do you know what is interesting? These thoughts no longer harmed me. I responded honestly. I recognized that we were both out of our minds back then. You made a mistake and I wasn't prepared to understand you. But that is in the past. Now for me. You are the woman I once loved and hope to always love. Shauna was concerned, but her eyes quickly filled with tears. She clasped my hand and, unable to resist, embraced me fiercely. "Thank you," she replied quietly, "because you refused to give up. Thank you both for fighting on." We remained there while the sky above us gradually took on the golden and pink tones of the setting sun. Then I understood we were on the correct track. Yes, there were more obstacles ahead, but we determined to confront them together. We learnt together to live, love, and accept one another for who we are, and maybe this time we'll actually succeed. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.